Happy New Year, listeners. We've made it to 2023. This is Mike over here, and who's that guy?
Oh, this handsome one over here. This is Russ.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, with my radio face.
Speaking of handsome, it's really a shame that we're not on video today because Russ is wearing a really styling shirt, I have to say. I wish you could all see this, but I'm kind of glad you can't see me because I just have my normal schleppy clothes on, you know, like I'm a 20th century composer.
But you're going out on the town tonight.
Yeah, I'll change my shirt before I go out, though.
Yeah, this one's a bit more colorful than I usually am, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I look like a tropical fish in a way, maybe.
In a way, yeah, but a really kind of dark-toned one. Yeah,
I'm glad you like it. Yeah.
So anyway, I've been waiting for this day, this new year, January 1st. We are recording on January 1st.
That's right.
Just to let people know. And I've been sitting on this bottle of Knob Creek single barrel reserve 9-year for weeks now because these are getting harder to find in Japan. I think they may not. This may be my last ever bottle. I don't really know. So here it is. I'm going to open it right now. And
don't worry, because I've got 4 bottles now.
Oh, God. I just got this one. Now, I made the mistake of, I was going to open this on the air here, but while we're recording. They can be tricky to open. Yeah, this thing, because it's got this little kind of tab on the end here, but it doesn't want to come off this waxy top. It's kind of sliding out of my fingers here. Terrible.
Well, here it goes.
Woo. Yeah, go ahead.
I was down in Osaka, and I went to one of the best bourbon bars, some say in the world, where there's a lot of very rare bourbons. I had a Old Ezra 15-year, I think, that hasn't been around for a while. Goes. You can. Oh, there goes the cork. Yeah, you can get a bottle of it on Rakuten now. It costs about $400 US. So I treated myself to a shot of that, and he also had a very rare old wild turkey. I think a 13-year, and some other very, very rare bourbons. And when I asked him about Knob Creek, he said he believes that we won't be able to get it anymore. So
no. Anyway, let's do the first bourbon pour of the new year. Now, this is not the. I don't know if you could hear that, listeners. This is not the first pour of the new year, sadly, because I had champagne for breakfast today.
Oh, jeez. You're a lush over there.
I feel like you have to start the new year in the most decadent way possible. So, had it in a nice champagne flute. I felt it.
Nice.
Alcohol in the morning is not a good thing.
I had a couple of shrines.
I don't recommend it.
On a walk today, and sometimes they have the sake out for a New Year's toast, but they didn't. So
they're really into alcohol here in Japan. They, it's like part of the whole shrine kind of religion thing too, like sake, nihonshu, what they call nihonshu.
Yeah, there's never you're never too far from a good drink when you're in Japan.
Yeah,
maybe that's why I stayed all these years.
Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, cheers to the new year. Here we go.
Great. Cheers. The music stores are great here, both for instruments and if you want to buy new or used recordings, some good stuff to check out. 2
things about Japan. I want to say one more thing. Tower Records, American listeners, still exists here.
Right.
Which is wonderful. So I like going in there. Yeah. I feel like it's still the 1990s sometimes, you know.
I was down in the Disc Union store when I was in Osaka too, and both they have a classical side and then they have jazz and other music, but in the classical side they had a whole wall of used super audio discs as well. So you won't find that in most other countries.
They're really into this whole Knob Creek thing too. This is a bottle of this that you can't get in the United States, even though it's an American sort of drink, bourbon made in Kentucky, but they're really very alcohol connoisseurs here, so they get special things all the time. If you're planning a trip to Japan and you like alcohol, this is actually a good place to explore.
That's right.
For that.
Well, here we are on episode 96, getting close to 100. Actually, we've already got over 100, including our interviews. We got the little badge from Podbean.
Oh, that's cool.
But we won't count it officially till we get to 100. And before we get into this episode's music, I want to just remind everyone, and if we have any new listeners, that you can find links to Spotify and Apple Music for all the music we're going to discuss in the episode description. Also at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the recordings in one place on Deezer. That's our favorite CD quality streaming platform from France. You can also listen to the podcast on Deezer, as well as almost every other platform. Just look us up, Adult Music Podcast. And if you can't see the full description or the links don't work on whatever app you're listening to us on, you can always come over and check out our host site, Podbean, podbean.com. Everything's easy to follow and well organized there. And if you enjoy the podcast, please follow, subscribe, wherever you listen to us, and tell a friend. If you have any music friends, that's one way we can get more listeners. If you give us a ranking or write a review, that will help us get listed in the browsing category recommendations, and that helps us grow our audience. We were back in the Apple Music commentary lists this week, so hopefully we got some new listeners from that. And you can also follow us on Facebook. We've got a page over there. Get some extra info and new releases.
Which I will be contributing to more this year. That's my New Year's resolution.
That's your resolution.
Because there's been a lot of jazz up there and not enough classical as far as that's because of me, really. I haven't been putting any classical up.
Yeah, I'll
start doing that.
Almost every day if I find something new that I think people want to hear right away.
I'll give that a shot. I don't think I can do every day. My resolution will be 3 times a week, okay?
Oh, that's good.
At least 3 posts a week, okay?
Yeah, and you can leave a message or comment on Facebook there. Or if you want to get in touch directly, you can send us an email message. Our address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com, and we'd be happy to hear from you. We're also cooperating with a few other music podcasts that we'd like to recommend. I'll put the links for them at the bottom of the description and their little promo clips at the end of the podcast. That's Tom Gauker's Something Came from Baltimore. It's a jazz blues and R&B interview podcast. We've got Same Difference, 2 jazz fans, 1 jazz standard. Well, this one's about jazz standards with snippets from different versions discussing the original and the different versions, and also Famous Interviews in Neon Jazz by Joe Domino. He interviews musicians, artists, and writers. So if you want to expand your podcast listening, please do check those other podcasts out.
Okay, Happy New Year to all of those podcasts and podcasters too, and their listeners as well. I want to mention, in our first year of existence, 2021, we had 5,275 downloads. And I played that number in the Japanese lottery, and I'm sad to say it didn't come out. So it was a complete bust. Anyway, this year, I kind of checked again, and we had a total, just from January until 2022 until today, 8,353 downloads. So I'm going to be playing that number in the lottery. So I'd like to ask listeners, please tell your friends about this podcast so that we can get more than 10,000 listeners. 10,000 downloads this year so that I don't have to play the lottery anymore because it's expensive and I'm just tired of losing. But I feel obligated to do it. So
you never know when your luck will come through.
If anyone knows any way to manipulate the numbers in the Japanese lottery, feel free to do so. My number is 8353 and I deserve to win. So there you go. I deserve a break here. Don't we all? Anyway. Yes. Feeling in good spirits, helped a bit by the free-flowing alcohol of the last 2 days. But let's get into today's program. Now, in classical music, I've chosen 3 composers that everyone will know for a change, and maybe people will be pleased by that. I feel like part of the reason we do this podcast, or at least I want to do it, is to introduce people to new composers they may not have heard of, and especially contemporary ones, so that we understand that classical music is still going on, even though it's not like moving the culture like it did in, say, the 18th and 19th and really early 20th centuries. Since World War II, it's just kind of become an art form that's kind of for just people who happen to be listening to it. Anyway, going back into the past today a little bit, we're going to go back to the 18th century. I'm not going to do a Baroque one. We're going to go into the classical era. The 3 big composers from that era, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Beethoven kind of straddles the classical and romantic. And in fact, Robert Greenberg suggests that the time Beethoven is alive, it shouldn't really be called classical or romantic. It should just be called the Beethoven era because he was so dominant as on everybody really as a composer, because people were kind of following what he did. His contemporaries were listening to what he did and kind of had their own take on it. Anyway, we're going to start with Haydn, Joseph Haydn. The composer that I would most like to meet from history, because he seems like a really nice guy. The rest of them seem like a bunch of lunatics. See, this is the thing about art and artists. We should be happy that the art survives, and maybe the artists don't, because the art is a lot better than the artist is. They put the best of themselves and the best of all of us really in their art, but a lot of times they're pretty miserable people. And Haydn was the exception to the rule, though. He seems like a genuinely nice man. All of his musicians liked him, and the ladies liked him too. When he went to London towards the end of his career, he was always invited to people's houses, and who knows what he got up to there. Anyway, he had a good sense of humor. You hear it a lot in his music as well. The album we're talking about today is Symphonies 6, Le Matin, 7, Le Midi, and 8, Le Soir. And these are all times of day, morning, afternoon, evening. These 3 symphonies named after the times of day. This is performed by Florilegium, who are directed by Ashley Solomon, who plays the flute. They are a British period instrument ensemble. They started in 1991.
Wow.
Yeah, so they've been around for a long time. And I've heard a lot of... Rachel Podger was involved with them long ago, too. She's since been on her own. But Ashley Solomon, too. I remember some pretty great flute concerto albums of Bach's music by him as well. But he's still, he's been directing them for quite a long time. This is on the Channel Classics label, which is also a British label.
Yeah, this is a really great sounding recording. I was listening to it again today because it's period instruments, but they sound so, smooth and... comfortable to listen to. I
kind of chose this one too specifically for today, for New Year's Day, because the first symphony is the morning, and New Year's Day morning in Japan is a really big deal. A lot of people get up early to watch the sunrise. It's sort of a tradition in Japan. Like they'll get up and some of them will even climb this mountain by my house and kind of see it come up. And people will even climb Mount Fuji or camp out on Mount Fuji so they can see the first sunrise of the year. That's a little too much for me. I've never done that. But so I thought this would be kind of a nice sort of, sort of marker for the new year. Anyway, let's talk about these. Now, if you know anything about Haydn, he composed his symphonies are numbered up to 104. Now, he didn't quite compose 104 symphonies. Since they've been numbered, a lot of them have been discovered to have been by someone else, when they thought they were by him. But nevertheless, there are a lot. He worked for the Esterházy family and had to come out with something for the house orchestra probably every week, sort of like Bach did with cantatas for the church when he was alive. Anyway, these are really early symphonies. They were all composed in 1761. Mozart was 5 years old at the time. All right, so Haydn's pretty much... on his own here as the big guy, except that he wasn't really known at the time because he was in the employ of the Esterházy family. They are not narrative program music in the style of Vivaldi, so we shouldn't really think of that. And Le Matin, the morning, and the finale of Le Soir, the evening, include tone painting, but they shouldn't really be thought of as works that are like that. All 3 works shine the spotlight on orchestral soloists in a similar way to the concertante or ripiano style that was so prevalent in Italy in the early part of the 18th century. So they owe something to Corelli's Concerti Grossi. This is really interesting. At this point, Haydn was a new composer for the Esterházy family. These are early symphonies. And, of course, you have to ingratiate yourself to the musicians because you're living with them at this time. It's not as though you're going to work every day, from your house. They're all living in the same kind of place, basically, and they had to play when they were summoned. And so Haydn wanted to ingratiate himself to the orchestral players. The prince, one of the benefits he gave his musicians is that if they had a solo in the work they were playing, they would be paid extra. So Haydn, to make them all happy, gave them a lot of solo lines. This is sort of like, if you think about it, Dickens being paid by the page to write his books, so he wrote really long books so he'd get a lot of money. So Haydn was very generous in this way, and of course his musicians loved him. He was a nice guy, and they made more money because of him. He gave them all little solo parts in this work. So you'll hear a lot of solos within this orchestral texture, so you want to keep an ear out for that. Okay, so there are prominent solos for the violin, the cello, the double bass, which was a favorite instrument of Haydn's, and wind players, including the bassoon, which would have been unusual at the time. There are so many solos for all the first-year players that they straddled the border between concerto and symphony, falling into an updated classical genre, the Sinfonia Concertante. So if you hear that word Sinfonia Concertante, it's like a symphony, and the concertante part means that there are a lot of solo parts, like a concerto, right? Okay, we don't know why these have the time of day theme, but there was a lot of material around at the time that had the same theme. And perhaps the booklet suggests Prince Esterhazy, who employed Haydn, and the musicians suggested it to them, give me something that has to do with the times of day. We don't really know, though. Anyway, getting on to the works, tracks 1 through 4, Symphony number 6 in D major, Hoboken 1, Roman numeral 1:6, Le Matin. I wonder why he gave these French titles, too. I really don't know why, but because he's in Austria. French was the big political language of the day, though, so maybe. Anyway, he starts this with something we'll become more familiar with Mozart, and Mozart probably got this from Haydn, the Adagio-Allegro. So the Adagio would be the introduction, the slow introduction, or actually also works from the Baroque era did this, like the French overture starts like this. It'll usually start with a slow sort of entrance music and then followed by a vigorous fugue. In this case, though, there's an allegro replacing the fugue. So this starts with a slow introduction in the first movement, Le Matin, that is, which Haydn did a lot to solidify as traditional in the classical era. We hear this a lot in Mozart symphonies as well, especially my favorite one, Symphony 38 by Mozart. Check that out. The Prague. Anyway, this Haydn work starts with tentative strings, then a pulsing rhythm, sounding like an indication of the sun rising. I can see that. This might be a little tone painting here. There's a pastoral feel to the heavy bass as well. So if the bass is droning, that'll give you the feeling of a musette or of like a rustic setting. Then we hear twittering flutes, could be birds, answered by the rest of the winds. This is the beginning of the Allegro, the main section, and the flute could be birdsong, as I said. The sun is up. Cheerful, classical type approach to cadences. There's lively positive energy to Florilegium's playing in this, and they capture the tempo and feel just right. And I have to tell you, I picked 3 albums today where I'm just going to say that again and again. Everything just feels so perfect about these choices today. I really scored big here on New Year's Day as far as music goes. There's lively positive energy. As I said, the sound quality of the album is on the dry side, but it's very clear and warm enough. Now, that's not a bad thing. We can hear the detail. You don't get just a lot of that room ambience on this recording. Brass instruments really blare when they're heard, and it's a satisfying period instrument way, so it's actually good. I rather like that. There's a roughness to it that's really appealing. And in fact, for our sort of more uncultured ears, those of us like me who grew up listening to rock and roll, this is really one of the things that drew me to period instruments. Yeah, just that the roughness of it. The
French horns really have appealing. That gobble gobble turkey kind of sound
turkey
to them.
Kind of.
I like
clucking. That. Yeah. Okay, a lot of creative orchestration for the era here. Listen to this sudden pizzicati in the bass at around 3 minutes and 20 seconds. By around 3 minutes and 30 seconds, we're already back to the sonata's recapitulation. This is a really quick movement. The sections glide so smoothly into each other that on first listen, it's hard to pull out the divides. We were in the development section before I knew what was going on. No worries, though. It's a really short movement. Everything seems elided in a way. And of course, sonata form wasn't really set out as anything formal at the time. Haydn was really one of the ones who developed this form, and he was really working with it a lot. A lot of times, Haydn work, you'll hear a theme, and then instead of a second theme, he'll just have that original theme in the dominant key, meaning the fifth above the tonic key, which would be the main home key of the work. So sonata was in flux here, but this is when it was a living, growing, changing thing. This is a pretty brief movement for a sonata form at 5 minutes and 57 seconds, and it's charming all the way through. Second movement, we get an adagio. Quiet, drawn-out tones in the strings begin the work. It's a rising figure. A rustic-sounding solo violin is heard at 25 seconds or so, double stopping his material. He has a solo line throughout, played without legato. It's a serene, calming melody, contentment and well-being at the beginning of the day. At 1 minute and 34 seconds, a new section starts. It's a bit quicker. The lack of vibrato gives the violin a rustic character throughout. Yeah, there's very little vibrato, if any, because this is a period instrument piece, and scholars tell us that vibrato just wasn't used in the violin then. It became a big thing in the Romantic era, really. To be honest, though, we really don't know, but that's what scholars are guessing here. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds, there's a call and answer section between the violin and solo cello. Remember, these are all solo lines. These guys are being well paid for this back in the day. Haydn's musicians were paid extra, as I said, if they played solos. And Haydn, of course, added a good amount of solo moments in his symphonies. There's a tiptoeing bass line for one section, making the rhythm stand out. At 6 minutes and 26 seconds, there's a nice false ending, followed by 2 chords, propelling the music into a coda, with long bowed chords slowly leaning towards the final cadence. Florilegium, the ensemble, catch the humor in the false ending, and change tack beautifully for the solemn chords that lead to the end. Okay, and this is really important. Classical musicians are, they're trained in the conservatory, and sometimes you feel like they can have all the humor or spontaneity trained out of them. I don't think that's really the case that much anymore. A lot of these ensembles are really good at capturing the humor in this music. I was thinking also of last week I mentioned this with Marc-André Amelin's CPE Bach recording, where he captures the humor in the pauses and the sudden changes and the things like that. Florilegium are very good at this as well on this performance. The third movement is a minuet. These are very traditional, and Haydn, in fact, did a lot to cement the use of the minuet and trio in classical symphonies. Beethoven would do away with these. He didn't like them. This one features a typical square minuet theme with a fluttering birdsong singing flute. The trio is more ominous. The trio is the middle section. It has a bassoon solo, accompanied by a deep chugging bass rhythm. The middle section of the trio features a rising figure in the melody and a busier bass. This performance makes use of a lot of the timbres, the bassoon having great presence on the recording and a dark, reedy sound that's very satisfying. The way the bass figure is played has a lot of character as well. The louder, square minuet then comes back, and we get a repeat, complete with flute birdsong. Our fourth and final movement is an allegro. It's uplifting and cheerful, and it has an amusing sudden slowing at 45 seconds. I'm so excited by it, I couldn't say the word. It has a sudden slowing at 45 seconds, which it shrugs off comically and goes back to the fast material and a cadence. A little bit of humor there. There's a sudden change to the minor key at 1 minute and 55 seconds, the material rushing through different keys and finally settling on the opening key and the theme. This time we hear an explosion of brass, sounding like an excited flock of turkeys gobbling, as Russ mentioned earlier. You can hear that at around the 2 minutes and 30 second mark. At 2 minutes and 55 seconds, we hear the slowing again, followed by the cadence. At 3 minutes and 16 seconds, there's a sudden shift back into the minor key, which I believe is a repeat of the B section material we just heard. And the opening material returns again after this, complete with brass turkeys, and we head to the cheerful ending cadence. This movement is uplifting, as is the entire work. And we're going to get into the other two works, and they're pretty uplifting too. Symphony number 7, The Afternoon, Le Midi, in C major, Hoboken Roman numeral 1:7, starts with another Adagio Allegro, so you have an introduction leading to a fast main section. This starts with a regal rhythm in the strings that fades to a staccato upward moving line, sort of like a tiptoeing away kind of sound. I always think of, when I hear those kind of things, I think of, after Wile E. Coyote has had the anvil dropped on his head, like dum, 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 you hear the bass kind of pizzicato as he tiptoes away. I really do miss that in cartoons. Instead of having sound effects, you'll have like musical instruments doing something to kind of indicate what's happening. I really love that. At 1 minute into the piece, the main section starts. Very quick introduction. It's mostly strings with quick bowing on the thematic lines. The cello gets a few nice looks in this section, while the violins move up into a high range, playing vibratoless as throughout this album. This is charming, as Haydn always is. The cadence isn't underlined, and we hear a repeat of the exposition. At around 3 minutes and 30 seconds, we leap into the development section, which features a lot of winding phrases in the strings, followed by strong accents in the wind and brass. There's a surprising shift at around the 4-minute mark to a new section, but we're not out of the development yet, nor are we at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, which features another harmonic surprise leading into new material. There's a full stop at 5 minutes and 30 seconds, a false ending to the piece. It continues after a moment, At about 6 minutes, we seem to be in the recapitulation, but it's hard to say. The material isn't repeated directly in line with the opening. Again, this is sonata form in sort of being sort of developed as we hear it, but the melodies are familiar. The brass has that wild turkey gobbling sound. This is a movement full of harmonic surprises and startling twists and turns. The audience must have been delighted. The second movement is labeled Recitativo Adagio. Recitativo is the section in an opera, a classical era opera, where the singer is speaking while the harpsichord plays. He's kind of explaining his emotions before his aria in which he expresses them. There are no singers in this movement, of course, but it means it's going to have that kind of speaking quality to it when we see this in a symphony. The opening has a walking alone in the dark woods feel to it, a sense of ominousness. There's a harsh chord at 31 seconds that interrupts the forward movement of the harmony. Then we resume after a brief statement. Another interruption occurs at the 57-second mark, this time with a longer response from the violin, with the orchestra supporting. You should notice the presence of a solo violin in this movement. Remember, he's getting paid for his solo, for having a solo line in Haydn's day. The movement does have the feel of recitativo, with chords in the orchestra underlining certain statements that the solo violin makes. At 2 minutes and 23 seconds, we get a cadence, then the aria apparently starts. The movement has a song-like operatic form. Twittering flutes are heard in the accompaniment as the violin is accompanied by a unison cello. The winds sound especially in bloom when they come in for their brief passages. They have a prolonged passage at 3 minutes and 40 seconds. There's a lot of material for the solo violin throughout the movement, with the cello peeking in at times. There's a sort of accompanied cadenza in the 7th minute that resolves into a duet with the cello. Nice resolve at the end. Third movement, minuet, traditional dance here. This is a minuet with a pretty heavy rhythm to it, falling heavily on the beats. There's some appealing brass harmony from the period brass instruments. The minuet flows more at the 39-second mark. At 1 minute and 33 seconds, the gentler, more legato trio begins. It features the cello playing an upward line and taking an active part in the bass line. The brass complement his line, and the minuet is back at the 3-minute mark. For the finale, fourth movement, it's allegro. It has a string melody with a lot of ornaments beginning the movement, after which a solo flute comes in with rapid, fluttering lines. In this movement, the flautist has the solos. I like his rapid, repeated notes at the end of his fluttering line. There's a beautiful full tone on what I think is a wooden flute. I think this is Ashley Solomon playing this, in fact, the director. By 1 minute and 50 seconds, we have slipped into a minor key, but by the 2-minute mark, we're already out of it. This movement seems to be a sonata, as we have what seems to be a development section in the 2nd and 3rd minutes with several key changes. At around 3 minutes and 15 seconds, the opening material comes back as in a recapitulation, and we head pretty quickly to a satisfying final cadence. This work was far more inventive than the opening Symphony 6. It has a lot more to it. I guess because we've had our coffee by now and it's afternoon and we're full energy. Anyway, last work is Le Soir, Symphony number 8. That is Hoboken, Roman numeral 1:8. This is in G major, the evening. The first movement is Allegro molto. Starts with light dancing strings, followed by a louder answering phrase. It's in 6/8. It has a floating quality, and there's no introduction this time. We just go right into it. So a little variety here. A typically charming Haydn theme is heard in this movement. Some of that period brass is thrown in for accents. At 2 minutes and 3 seconds, we get into the much more lightly scored development section with the same charming rhythmic bounce as the opening. There's some momentary forays into the minor keys, but we quickly come out of them. Incidentally, 2 minutes is a really short time to have spent with the thematic material. I don't think there was a repeat in this, but I didn't indicate it. The brass, when they are heard, make the cross as a hunting horn call, so the string theme could be thought of as a horse trotting. Haydn in this movement, as well as in the previous symphonies, is up to harmonic tricks to trick us into thinking the development is over when it's not. A shortened and slightly rearranged recapitulation starts at 4 minutes and 10 seconds. Fantastic and emphatic false cadence is heard at 4 minutes and 48 seconds, which leads into a brief coda that brings us to the cadence. Florilegium makes sure we hear every harmonic sleight of hand and dissonance. It's a great performance, a charming movement, and it's full of like Haydn's, the sort of sense of humor that Haydn put in his works. He liked to subvert expectations a lot. He would have been a great film director if he were alive now. or in the 20th century when film was good. Anyway, second movement, Andante. As with the adagios in the previous symphonies, the pacing and feel is perfectly caught here, as is the right touch pressure on the melodies. Very light. This is soft and elegant, qualities we no longer hear in contemporary music, so you want to remember that part of your sort of persona. You got to listen to classical music for this. Possibly jazz as well, but classical does elegant exceptionally well. Apparently it's still in us, though, as the ensemble captures that feeling well. At 1 minute and 52 seconds, there's a solo violin note droning with no vibrato, making it stand out. This is one of many ways that the ensemble used to bring out the details in the orchestration. At 2 minutes and 24 seconds, the beginning repeats, and at 4 minutes and 26 seconds, we get the next section opened by the lower strings for a contrasting sound. Then we seem to go right back to the opening, but not for long. There's some Haydn-esque harmonic sleight of hand that brings us to a more anxious-sounding harmony, which then goes through a long period of resolution. At 6 minutes and 26 seconds, we're back to the opening material, the A section. This is an ABA movement, so there's a middle section, and this ends calmly. The third movement is another minuet. This is also ABA. And a Boolean theme in the opening minuet is heard, sounding like a standard dance in 3/4 time. The middle section of the minuet keeps the same tempo and volume, the contrast coming in the direction of the thematic material. At about 1 minute and 15 seconds, the trio section starts, more lightly scored and a bit more legato, though it utilizes tiptoeing staccato bass at points. Think Wile E. Coyote again, which the Florilegium ensemble characterized creatively. The main minuet returns at about 3 minutes and 38 seconds. The fourth movement is a bit of a tone painting. This is La Tempesta, marked presto. Now, a tempest, of course, is a storm. This particular storm is nothing like Beethoven's in his Pastoral Symphony, which would come almost 50 years later, I guess, or even a little less than 50 years later, 1808. This is 1761. This has a light string figure bringing the feel of pattering rain, opening the movement. There's also the wooden flute figure in the opening. The Tempest theme is there right from the beginning, with quick tremolos in the strings, giving the feeling of clouds about to burst. There's a pastoral dance quality in the material at 50 seconds. It may very well be a forerunner of Beethoven's Storm movement in his Sixth Symphony. He uses a lot of similar effects to indicate the coming of the storm, if not the storm itself. This storm is taking a long time to burst here, though, with the ominous tremolos building a lot of tension. At 1 minute and 50 seconds, there's a cadence, and we're off to a happier, fast dance. I guess the storm went away. Harmonic tension is built up by the repeating figures at the beginning of the second minute, after which the flute plays some chirping downward figures. There's another full cadence at around 3 minutes and 30 seconds, then a quick buildup of harmonic tension. We reach peak tension at around 3 minutes and 50 seconds, then there's silence and the flute figure returns, calming things down. The movement ends on an emphatic cadence. I feel like this movement gives us the threat of a tempest without the actual storm, but perhaps I'm reading Beethoven's movement backwards into history in this one. The movement has its tense moments, but they're always taken away by something more cheerful. Anyway, as you might expect from Haydn, it's an enjoyable movement. And that's the album, and I have to say I'm very impressed by how perfectly judged these performances are. They have all the humor offered by attention to sudden rhythmic stops and the drawing out of odd sounds that period instruments can make. The performances are all charming. In every work, there's a rough edge to the sheen of the playing that makes it more enjoyable still, and I enjoyed this album immensely. I think it's a fantastic album to start your new year with.
Yeah, I like this a lot. I said it was really classy. The thing that drew me into it, most of all, was these great timbres from the instruments. I just liked the sound a lot. I thought the performances are maybe a little bit restrained in the approach to things, but not overly so.
Very English.
Just that they allowed me to really bathe in the rich sound. I never felt anything was hurried or sort of too fast or
everything
too
breathed really well.
Just a tonally rich and satisfying performance. And I enjoyed this really a lot. I listened to it again today. I liked it so much. So
I liked it so much too. Whew, I'm glad you had that to say, because I just took a big gulp of my bourbon there and it just set my chest on fire here. So I had to recover from that. Okay, so our next album in classical music is one of my favorite works. Schubert's Piano Trio No. 1 in B-flat major, Opus 99, coupled with his Florilegium Quintet, or the Trout Quintet, in A major, Deutsche 667. This is performed by the Busch Trio. They are Matthew Van Bellen on violin, Ori Epstein on cello, and Omri Epstein on piano. And in the Florilegium Quintet, we hear Daniel Palmizio on the viola and Naomi Sheam on double bass. So this trio, the Busch Trio, is named after the violinist Adolf Busch. He was also a conductor and composer. And also after Matthew Van Bellen's violin, which is the ex-Adolf Busch G.P. Guadagnini, made in Turin in 1783. So they called themselves the Busch after the violin, which Busch himself used, and the actual violinist himself. I love the Schubert piano trios. They're very long, but it's no great hardship listening to them at all. They're just so full of invention and wonderful melodies that you never really get tired of them. I should mention the Busch Trio also recorded Piano Trio No. 2. Schubert wrote only 2 piano trios. And that was released in 2019, so you can go back and look that up, too. That's another fantastic work, and a big contrast with this one, but still full of great melodies. I've never seen this combination before. Usually the Trout Quintet gets put on with something else, but I guess you just add 2 musicians to the trio, and you have this quintet. And they're 2 odd instruments, too. The double bass usually isn't used in a quintet. Usually it's a cello. But I guess Schubert wanted that. Well, he was writing specifically for on request to a certain ensemble, which is why it has this odd instrumentation. Both of these are very sunny works. Again, a good way to start the new year in a positive way. Let's talk about Piano Trio No. 1 in B-flat major, Opus 99, Deutsche 898. This was possibly composed in 1828 or finished then. That's the year Schubert died, by the way. I believe he was 31 years old. Incidentally, we've been seeing a lot of Schubert recordings coming out last year. I think because it's the 225th anniversary of his birth. Now, he died, as I said, in 1828, so we can expect another big festival in 5 years or so. But there have been a real deluge of Schubert recordings this year. Anyway, first movement of the Piano Trio No. 1, Allegro Moderato. It starts in bright-sounding B-flat major. The recording is good, and the trio format does a lot for transparency here. The theme has a lot of scale-climbing motifs. You'll notice this almost right away. I was very impressed with the velvety tone that Bellen achieves at 1 minute and 42 seconds when his theme comes in solo. He sounds like an old-school violinist, maybe like Adolf Busch himself there. There are also a lot of hesitant pauses in this movement, as though indecisive about where to go next. This is written into the score. Then spontaneously deciding on a direction. We hear the velvety violin tone again at 5 minutes and 35 seconds when the material repeats. We get a full exposition repeat in this movement, of this very long movement, really. At 6 minutes and 57 seconds, the development starts very slowly and quietly, feeling out new harmonies and expanding into them. It seems to me the Busch Trio shape all of these lines perfectly to register the emotions contained therein and pace the work perfectly as well. I really enjoyed this a lot. It's an excellent performance. The balance between the instruments is also excellent. Toward the end of the 9th minute, or at 10 minutes and 42, it's hard to say which, because the material at the 10-minute mark could just be embellishment of the theme. The recapitulation of the opening material quietly starts. At 13 minutes and 10 seconds, a brief coda starts that brings us to the build-up to the final cadence. We briefly hear the material from the opening theme again before the final cadence is hammered out. Now, I just breezed through this long movement. There are a lot of fantastic melodic moments in them, and it would take a long time to indicate them all. But I would say just listen to this and enjoy it, as I know you will. Second movement, Andante un poco mosso. This is really one of Schubert's greatest melodies. There's a thoughtful, melancholic opening, and it's played gently by the cello and bass. Rather surprised when the violin comes in at 53 seconds to find that we've been hearing the cello in a high voice. This is something about recordings. You can't really identify the instruments right away, but if you were actually watching this, you'd know who was playing. Pacing is perfectly judged to capture the movement's emotional quality. This is a comment I'm going to make throughout, really. The tempo gives a lingering quality to the music. There are dramatic outbursts by the 5th minute, but all calms down quickly with soothing sweeps of bows over strings. I especially like the piano's muted sound at around the 5 minutes and 50-second mark. as a new arrangement of the melodic material comes in. There are a lot of subtle shading moments by all members of the trio in this movement, and in the work in general. The themes remain light and have a gorgeous floating quality to them in the strings. Third movement, Scherzo Allegro. Again, impressed by how precisely the tempo is realized to squeeze out the entire feeling of the material. In this movement, the mood contrasts with the previous Andante. It's more of a chipper feeling, not too lively, but enough to give a lively feel. The trio section starts just at the start of the third minute, featuring 2 staccato chords, followed by a rest in the piano accompaniment, with flowing themes in the strings. At 4 minutes and 45 seconds, the trio material peters out without a cadence, and we're back to the opening minuet. The fourth movement, Rondo, I kind of found this a little hard to follow, actually, labeled Allegro Vivace. Schubert calls this a rondo, but it comes across as something more complicated than that, relying on contrast between the sunny, flowing opening theme and loud staccato outbursts from the piano in between. It's more like a sonata rondo, but I can't really tell if it's an actual sonata being, exposed in there. The rondo theme comes skipping in happily and sunnily with a light, naive energy provided by the tempo. The first departure from the rondo is emphatically played, then a hazy, muted theme follows. The variations on the rondo theme have the feel of an Austrian folk dance. We hear the loud outbursts interrupting the flow at each departure from the rondo theme, but calm always returns. The material is all based on contrast, quiet, melodic sections versus sharp, disconnected outbursts. The themes dissipate at the end and reach a very emphatic, hammered-out final cadence, as in the first movement. This is a really fantastic performance of this work. My favorite has always been the Florestan trios on the Hyperion label from way back in 2000s or the 1990s even. I don't remember when it was. I've been listening to that one forever, but now I've got this one, so I might update. We'll have to see. Then we get the Trout Quintet, labeled here Florilegium Quintet, which is the German name. Florilegium is a trout. In A major, Deutsche 667, possibly written in 1819. This is called the Trout Quintet, incidentally, if anyone doesn't know, because the Schubert has a song called The Trout, Die Florilegium, for a singer and a pianist. And the fourth movement, Tema con variazione, is a variation on that song. So that's why his works get these odd names, because he's doing a set of variations on one of his songs. Anyway, but we'll get there in a moment. This is also a very sunny work. The first movement, Allegro Vivace, think about that marking there, Vivace, lively. And this has a surprisingly slowly taken opening, with lingering string lines after the piano arpeggios. Usually it's faster. I do like the droning bowed bass pinning everything down. The bass adds a lot of richness to the lower end of the piece, and it's well captured here, making its effects heard without being overly obtrusive. You almost don't hear the bass. You kind of sense that it's there. Oh, unless, of course, you're listening, as I was. I heard it when it came in. But it's really beautifully realized on this performance. The piece picks up energy and speed rather suddenly in the first minute, contrasting with the opening. I'm pretty sure that's an interpretational effect and not one from the score. The material flows beautifully, as was the case in the trio. At 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the opening repeats with its slower, melancholy opening. The approach to the cadence at the end of the section has a nice bounce to it. Listen near the end of the 6th minute. There are a lot of slippery avoidances of the cadence until we finally reach the closing cadence at about 8 minutes and 20 seconds. At 8 minutes and 21 seconds, we get what is really a middle section. It's thinner, like a trio is. There's no development happening here, just new material in a minor key. By 9 minutes and 40 seconds, we start hearing familiar rhythmic patterns with the key constantly changing, aiming to get back to the opening A major, which is reached in a flourish at 10 minutes and 15 seconds, far more brightly played here than at the beginning, as though the opening cobwebs have been swept away and sunlight is now allowed in. This appearance of the theme has appealing, flowing energy to it, which continues right up to the energetic, satisfying final cadence. This is unusual, how the first movement is not a sonata. Usually they are. I'm pretty sure it's not anyway. That's how I heard it. Anyway, the second movement, Andante, is a slower movement. It's got a gorgeous melodic opening with a double bass felt without having attention drawn to it. It's a very subtle performance of this movement. The theme consists a lot of trills of a lot of trills by the pianist. In the first minute, we get into quick arpeggiated chords that lead to constant changes of key until we're in a minor key and hearing a theme in the low strings with the bass thumping out a bass line. The piano returns for more cheerful material, like a guiding light to the harmony. At 2 minutes and 57 seconds, the piano theme appears with a march rhythm in the strings, then suddenly resolves at 3 minutes and 20 seconds. A new section starts then with a quick dotted rhythm theme in the piano that's familiar from the opening. The harmonic lines in the strings are all beautifully blended and warm sounding. We get the familiar arpeggiated key changes until we reach stability with a string harmony theme with a quick repeating ta-ta in the violin at the top, just keeps repeating. The piano comes back and leads to the end after a brief harmonic details that really grab the ear. The final rhythm to the final cadence is the march rhythm we heard earlier. The third movement is a scherzo. It's presto. It ebulliently leaps out of the speakers. Watch the volume here after the previous movement. Taken at an energetic yet not particularly quick tempo. There's a brief middle section. Then the ebullient theme comes back in this very brief movement. The fourth movement, tema con variazione, theme and variations. The theme is the Trout, the song The Trout. This is a movement where the quintet gets its Trout nickname from. The opening theme is, as often, taken more melodically and with less rhythmic bounce than it is in the song that it's named after. I guess here it's trying to pull out the harmonic materials. There's a contrast once the piano comes in at the 1 minute mark. The rhythm livens up a bit with the strings very subtly playing an accompaniment. The themes are sensitively shaped by the pianist. He pulls out subtler feelings than we generally get in this song. The low strings have the theme in the next variation, with the high strings creating an arabesque effect and the piano commenting. The next variation at about 3 minutes consists of rapid piano figuration with the strings chugging out the theme. At 3 minutes and 46 seconds, a loud emphatic variation is heard, especially in the piano. After that, the next variation is a slow, quietly played one in the strings with a floating quality to it. Very light. At 6 minutes and 10 seconds or so, a lively, fast, but light variation is played by the violin and then passed on to the other strings as the piano plays the rippling arpeggios it has in the original song setting. The piece ends with a calm cadence after this. Yeah, the original song, the piano line, is a bunch of arpeggios that have like accents in them that sort of indicate the fish on the line kind of leaping out of the water or struggling to get free. And here, that's kind of played down a bit, I guess, for the sake of the variations. But that's what I got out of that. This has a fifth movement and then final one, the Allegro Giusto. It's an appealing Austrian dance-like theme, and it serves as what sounds like it's going to be a rondo theme, but really it's going to be more like an A-B form repeated 3 times, with varying orchestration and harmonization. Now, please, I didn't study this score. I'm really going by my ears here, so this is not a scholarly examination. Schubert excels at these types of themes. They can be heard in the final movements of all of his major chamber works, especially the string quintet in C major, another work I really love. We get away from this theme in the first minute, and the material gets passed on to various contrasting textures. At 1 minute and 56 seconds, we get reminiscences of the previous Trout movement in the piano arpeggios. One unexpected episode follows another unexpected episode up to a cadence at 3 minutes and 8 seconds. And then we finally hear the opening rondo theme again, but not exactly as we heard it the first time. We go through a lot of similar material again from the B section in what is effectively the C section. I wanted to change this. Instead of A, B, C, D sections, I want to say it's B1, A, B2, A, B3, because it's really the same material. It just keeps being reorchestrated. It proceeds differently each time you hear it, and more dramatically this time, the second time we hear it. I really like the way that the ensemble is making these works sound so fresh in these performances. At 6 minutes and 16 seconds, we're back to the opening dancing theme, continuing a bit differently in the piano this time. As we pass one more time through the colliding ideas of what this B2 section would be, the intensity builds further than it had in the previous 2 B sections. At the end of the movement, we don't get a repeat of the opening theme, just an emphatic cadence after all of these pieces. We get the cadence on the B theme. Anyway, after all this, it's a very long album. It kind of goes up to 82 minutes, I believe. I'm left feeling elated after these performances. I feel like they capture the mood of the works perfectly in every way. Tempos are perfectly judged. Ensemble is well captured on the recording. Even better, by the way, than in their recording of the Piano Trio No. 2, which had a lot more sort of room reverb on it. Here, transparency allows us to hear all of the voices without singling any of them out. The quintet is especially well recorded, with the bass registering almost it just kind of filling out the bottom without drawing attention to itself. A really great performance by the bass player. Both pieces come up sounding fresh, and I was especially impressed by the whole sound of that quintet. I want to give the bass player another shout out, Naomi Shayam, on the double bass. So there you have it. A great recording. Again, another great New Year's Day or New Year's week listen. Or really, 2023 listening. This is a great album. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, this was another really good pick. I noticed right away that I was going to like listening right to the end because I really enjoyed the sound of the violins on this recording. Sometimes violins get on me with that kind of edgy tone that wears me out, but the tone was really pleasing here despite the energetic kind of playing. And so I really was drawn into the sound and timbres of the strings. And overall, I thought they did an excellent job in highlighting the contrasts in Schubert's movements. There's a lot of sections that have great variety, switching things, and they seem to just get all of those things played really stylishly. And as you say, the addition of the bass in the quintet gives this extra low end to listen to. I was drawn into all the different movements, and it's like you say, it's long, but it's really enjoyable to the end, and really good energetic performance. Very pleasing. I've heard this work before, but I don't think I've enjoyed it as much as I did listening to this one.
Right. I think, and this, what you said about length is going to really play into my my concluding comments after the classical music section. But yeah, these works, they're inventive and they're catchy, both. And it's a great way to even get into classical music if you really want to expand your sort of attention. You get a longer attention span. This is easy to.
Great melodies. The themes are just really they stick with you, and I think everyone will know that.
And then what he does with them too.
Yeah, but also the Andante, the second movement in the trio is also a great melody. You don't have to be a seasoned classical listener to really appreciate these. So. Yeah,
and in these performances too. Now, you might have noticed that we started with Haydn, and then we've got an Austrian theme going here, or, basically all three of these composers we're talking about worked in Austria. Two of them were actually Austrian, Schubert, and actually Schubert may have been German, I'm not really sure. And Haydn was Austrian. Yeah, Schubert was German, but they all worked in Vienna, as did our final composer, Mahler, Gustav Mahler. He was Bohemian from what is today the Czech Republic. We are hearing his Symphony No. 5 in C-sharp minor. This is the performed by the Czech Philharmonic, conducted by Semyon Bychkov on the Pentatone label. Now, you might notice that I've kind of gone for, as these three composers, they're all later in time than the previous, but they're all sort of building on each other, and their movements are getting longer and longer until here we are at really maximum length in Mahler. So this music expands as it goes. This is a single symphony. It's about, here it's 70 minutes long. It could be longer in some performances, but this one's pretty quickly taken. This particular symphony, number 5, is a darkness to light symphony, beginning with a funeral march and ending 70 plus minutes later with a blaze of D major sunshine. Unlike the first through fourth symphonies of Mahler, the path to light is less sure in this one, but we do get there, don't worry. The vistas along the way are so heterogeneous, so rich in polyphony, that shadows constantly impinge. Anyway, this is a 5-movement work, and if you want to kind of put it in some kind of a form that's going to help you get through it, you could think of the first, it's actually in 3 parts. He's labeled this in 3 parts, even though there are 5 movements. Part 1 is the first and second movements, and they're all dark and deal with like death and a funeral march. The third movement is sort of like this is part 2, is the fulcrum on which the darkness turns to light. And the fourth and fifth movements are the lighter movements, and they're also labeled as part 3. Anyway, let's talk about this performance. It's kind of interesting. First movement labeled Trauermarsch, which is a funeral march. In gemessenem Schritt, streng wie ein Kondukt. Okay. Anyway, those are directions for the speed. Part 1 of this is part 1 of the symphony. The opening fanfare was described by Mahler as Der kleine Appel, or the little summons. It is a motif of ascent and was first briefly heard buried in the texture of the previous Fourth Symphony. All of Mahler's symphonies connect. They're all sort of like this big giant story of his, I guess, life in a way. They're sort of autobiographical. No one has really exposed more about himself and his foibles and weaknesses than Mahler has in music. And I think that's one of the things that people like about it, is it's just brutal honesty, especially now when nothing we get on the internet seems to be honest at all. Well, that's what music is for, the remedy for that. Anyway, at the beginning, the horn theme is played emphatically with aggression. The orchestra really blazes in when it's first heard at the 39-second mark. Watch those speaker volumes, unless you want your neighbors coming over and complaining. It's got a plush sound, clear, spacious, present, and ominous. Bychkov and the Czech Philharmonic make every note register, and that's saying something in a score as complex as Mahler's. He used a gigantic orchestra in all of his symphonies. The tempo for this, the thing that really captured me about this entire performance of all 5 movements, is the tempo is always on the quick side, but it's not particularly fast. All of the brief crescendos are crisply taken, and crisp is a good word to use in describing the entire sound of this performance. It's a pretty remarkable recording. The brass absolutely blazing out of the speaker. The soft sections have taut rhythms. Nothing is sagging at all throughout the 70 minutes of this work. Even in the quiet section, we're on our way to somewhere. A big character change occurs at the 5-minute and 30-second mark as the rhythm starts rushing with a carnivalesque feel, quickly morphing into chaos and anxiety. I want to mention something about Mahler's music. Whenever you hear something sounding like a carnival or circus music, or even Jewish klezmer music, it's all popular music, and he uses it to, usually, I guess, maybe always, to indicate some sort of breakdown or some sort of moment of, traumatic moment. What he's really saying, it's really interesting, and people pick up on this too. He's claiming that when we have something traumatic happen to us, that our mind sort of lets go into some sort of something more popular or empty, or something that really sort of contrasts with what we're actually experiencing. And he uses these kind of popular forms to indicate some kind of trauma. And that would be what's happening here at 5 minutes and 30 seconds. The carnivalesque feel, and by 6 minutes and 55 seconds, we reach a climax of anxiety as a peak of a crescendo is reached and the string lines come soaring downward. The opening horn motif comes back here, and we're back to the ominous reality of the funeral march. The material from the opening, the exposition, is repeated here, though it's reorchestrated and reharmonized in subtle ways. I like the quiet timpani at 10 minutes, outlining the rhythm and the opening trumpet motif. After this, we hear a new rhythm for the funeral march melody that followed the trumpet motif. Here it's romanticized, no longer a march. The movement comes across as ominous and dark without the granitic, unmovable quality that older classical performances have. I'm thinking of Claudio Abbado's recordings with the Berlin Philharmonic. I think that's a good thing, though. I mean, I wouldn't call this tempo fleet, but it's starting to lean towards fleetness. The second movement, Stürmische Bewegt. Before I get into this, one more thing about Mahler. There's always some kind of a funeral element to his works, and the reason for that is also autobiographical. A lot of his brothers and sisters died in their youth, some of them like just after they were born. So he had a lot of experience with death and funerals in his childhood, and it apparently followed him into his life. He kind of saw that as I think he's working out that trauma in a lot of his works, and including here. So the second movement, Stürmische Bewegt mit großer Vehemenz. Vehement, right? Mahler said that the Funeral March first movement was really an introduction to this, the true first movement. So you could think of that entire long first movement as just an introduction. This second movement features angry recriminations and music of aching sincerity in the strings alone, which tell us that grieving may never be done. Oh man, not what I want to hear. But actually, we'll find out that maybe it won't be done, but there is a respite from it in this particular work. 6 months before Mahler had written these movements, he had suffered a near-fatal hemorrhage requiring an operation at the Löw Sanatorium in Vienna. Within the melee of this movement, an olive branch is raised, a breakthrough. It's in D major, and you can recognize it by the harp glissandos. I'll tell you when it comes up. And confirmatory rumble from the timpani. Its theme is a boldly ascending chorale. A chorale is chords, often that are sung in church, so they have this holy quality to them. When you hear them, you should really learn, if you listen to classical music, you should really learn to identify those because it indicates something extra musical. Victory proves premature, though, and the facade crashes down. But don't worry, though, that chorale will come back at the end of the symphony. The ominousness of the opening is caught well. It's not as histrionic as older classic recordings. The form is kind of coming through more here as it is in the opening movement. I think of like Bernstein's recording of this, which, as you can imagine, if you know anything about Bernstein's conducting, is extremely histrionic. He really wanted to push the emotions across. He was very flashy that way. This is slightly faster than usual, as is the entire symphony, really. But again, not particularly fast. Lots of detail, peeks through the texture in this impressively clear recording, with Bychkov etching the thematic material deeply into the brain. At 1 minute and 25 seconds, we get a repeating wind motif as the cellos play the next grief-stricken theme. By the way, don't let all this grief put you off. This is really going to be a good journey to go on, especially when we get to the fourth movement. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds, the angry outbursts of the opening return. The speed of the movement and tautness of the rhythm makes the form of the movement easy to follow. A lot of times when composers will, or when conductors, however, someone like, especially Bernstein, but Abbado too, will like linger on these emotional things, we can lose track of the form of the movement. And I think we feel a bit lost when we don't know what that is. This might be a good performance for new listeners to hear for that reason. Already at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, we're back to the quieter, weeping cellos. Well, the reason I think this would be a good performance for new listeners to hear is because the form is so clear, so we kind of don't really feel like we're getting lost in the whole orchestration. Okay, so the section we're in at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, the weeping cellos, continues with the repeating wind motif back, all slightly reharmonized and paced slightly differently. I love the subtle muted trumpets at 6 minutes and 30 seconds. They just peek out of the texture in the left speaker. At 8 minutes and 22 seconds, the rhythm suddenly picks up, and the short motivic themes climb until we reach a positive blaze at about 8 minutes and 40 seconds, punctuated by the anxious opening material of the movement. There's a struggle going on here as something tries to break free of the anger and grief we've heard so far. We reach something calmer at 9 minutes and 50 seconds. There's a dynamic climax at around 10 minutes and 20 seconds, and we're back in dark, lamenting spaces. Another positive blaze at 12 minutes and 20 seconds with the harp heard, and a triumphant theme in the brass. This one is free of any grief. It's all light, but already starts to falter at 13 minutes and 7 seconds, despite reaching higher still. It's a remarkable moment, and is well captured here in the brightness of the sound. The anxiety returns quickly, however. At 13 minutes and 45 seconds, we have anxiety again, and we head to the end rather disappointed that the breakthrough wasn't permanent. But we've seen the light, and that will inspire us onward. It happened and won't be forgotten by us or by Mahler. As the symphony goes on, we actually hear a glimmer of it at 14 minutes and 45 seconds. The grieving motifs come back, but they're fainter now, though still there. Okay, so you want to notice the 12-minute and 20-second mark, the harp indicating the positivity. So we have this moment of breakthrough, but then we're just pulled back down into the depths, and we're trying to get out of that. So we've had that vision, sort of. And I think a lot of us in life, if we're adults by now, if we're getting towards the end of our, towards the second half of our lives, let's say, have probably had experiences like this, where you just see this light when you're in this place of darkness, and you know that everything is going to be okay in the end, even though it's not good now. And that's the quality that Mahler's putting across there, I think. Okay, so the third movement is a scherzo. That's it means joke. Macht kräftig nicht zu schnell. This is the fulcrum where the darkness of this symphony kind of teeters towards the light. There's a gulf between its mood and what has gone before. The funeral drama is forgotten, and D major, often Mahler's goal in previous symphonies, is restored. By the way, D major was the key we heard at the 12-minute and 20-second mark of the previous movement, the positive blaze. The rallying between an obbligato horn and its counterparts within the main body of the orchestra imply an alpine landscape. So the outdoors as sort of healing. A lot of composers such as Beethoven really thought of the outdoors as being some positive healing force on us. Maybe people who are constantly on their phones today would do well to pick up on that idea. Get out into the woods and hug a tree, all right? I think it'll be good for you. Okay. The mood is much happier and even playful at the beginning. The conductor, Bychkov, manages to make this material seem completely separated from what we've heard in the previous two movements. Well, Mahler does this through his orchestration, but Bychkov really highlights it with the uplift in the rhythm and the brightness of his orchestra, the Czech Philharmonic. This movement continues the slightly faster tempo we've heard from the beginning, and it pays off here, lifting this movement to a more cheerful profile. There's something of the outdoors and open nature in the chirping of the woodwinds and the swaying of the string lines. A contrast occurs at 2 minutes and 40 seconds as the strings take over at a quieter dynamic. Suddenly, at 3 minutes and 32 seconds, we're back to the opening thematic material. And I won't say theme, because there are a lot of them playing at the same time, giving the feeling of a summing of sounds when one is in nature. I kind of thought of, we did the Caroline Shaw recording 2 weeks ago, and there was a movement she did where it was in the woods, and you heard like the birds coming from different elements of the ensemble. You get a more sort of involved version of that here. There's a bit of darkness in this section, perhaps a memory of the first two movements, whose mood is now at a distance. At 6 minutes and 58 seconds, a pizzicato section begins, and the strings sounding guitar-like in its articulation. Winds take over, then bowed strings smooth the theme out. The muted trumpet at 8 minutes and 50 seconds plays a swaying melody, sounding distant and ghostly, surely marked to sound like that by Mahler in the score. He's probably, apart from the ensemble, this particular instrument is probably in another room or distant from the rest of the orchestra to get that sound. At 8 minutes and 50 seconds, the muted trumpet. The whole section has a melancholy to it, so we're not quite in a state of permanent sunlight. At 10 minutes, the strings try to dance their way out of the shadow, but anxiety quickly takes over, and the material becomes manic in its striving. At 11 minutes and 5 seconds, we're suddenly at the carefree beginning of the movement again after a pause. The darkest section isn't worked through to the end. It's as though we've just put it out of mind. More serious-sounding shadows do intervene, but are quickly dispelled as the material struggles between cheerful dancing and ominous harmony in the 13th and 14th minutes. There's a fantastic orchestral outburst registering loudly on the recording at 15 minutes as the brass attempts to keep darker forces at bay with its calming fanfares. The ending of the movement is triumphant. Okay, we reach part 3 of the symphony with the fourth movement, Adagietto. Oh, the famous Mahler Adagietto. This is probably the most famous orchestral movement he composed in his life. It's really well known now. Mahler composed this movement the year after the previous 3 movements. Instead of the outdoor setting of the third movement, we get an internalized and even domestic reflection on the rising textures we heard at the close of the second movement, the part where the breakthrough in anguish occurs at the 12-minute and 20-second mark. I'm not reading that. I hope I'm remembering it well, but it's in the 12th minute. This music has a musical kinship with Mahler's setting of Friedrich Rückert's poem, Ich bin der Welt abhanden gekommen. And if you don't know that song, listen to it now. It's exceptionally beautiful, as is this movement. This fourth movement unsettles the symphony's presumed philosophical course, which Mahler inherited from Beethoven and followed in his previous 4 symphonies. So this is a real turning point for Mahler's work in general and for this symphony in particular. People go to this movement first usually when they or only listen to this movement on its own. But I think you've got to earn this movement by listening to the first 3, because it'll just register that much more deeply. Here, again, it's taken at a quicker tempo than usual. And in fact, if you like the glowing quality that this movement has, I'd go to the Abbado recording with the Berlin Philharmonic on this. It's really beautiful. This particular performance doesn't have the melting quality that Abbado gets. But Bychkov is not after that here. He's after something else. Rhythms are absolutely taut, as has been the case throughout the symphony. The accompanying harp is very present, and the shape of the melody, rather than the feel of the orchestration, is brought into the foreground by the quicker tempo. At 3 minutes and 24 seconds, we move to a new section with some pleading material supported by denser, darker harmony. Bychkov makes this section rather dramatic with light dynamic swells on accented notes. At 6 minutes and 10 seconds, we arrive back at the A section with the opening theme repeated with subtle rewritings of the melody and rhythm. So this is a little less meltingly romantic than we usually get this movement. But again, it's of a piece with what we've heard up to now and all throughout, and really well integrated into this symphony in this performance. The fifth movement and final one, the rondo finale, marked allegro, starts with a kind of horn sound in the early morning. The notes say a matinal horn. So maybe a horn at sunrise. You can imagine yourself in the countryside here. And a larky bassoon introduces strands from a song called Lob des Hohen Verstandes, a song concerning a pair of competitive birds. You can listen to that on your own. We're back in the open air with a breeze of D major, which is really the positive key of this symphony. The chorale theme we heard in the second movement is back without a shred of anxiety attached to it. It seems simple here and even naive. If you think back to the Fourth Symphony, if you know this work, the Song of the Child in Heaven, it's got that naive quality here as well. But here there are no words, of course. Critics claim that the devastating struggles of the preceding movements still linger in the mind, despite the skies being clear for this movement. But the movement ends in happiness and light, and you, as the listener, are free to decide for yourself what you want it to be. Anyway, the quicker tempo has been consistent throughout the work, and this movement is also at a slightly faster pace than familiar older interpretations. The nature quality of the outdoors and bird twitterings come across well as the early morning horn call that starts the work, indicating the outdoors and a wide open space. Spirits are the highest they've been in the work in this movement. At 2 minutes and 54 seconds, we're into a rustic theme with rough-hewn bass notes. We should also think about the countryside as being a place of happiness for people in the 19th century. They're away from their problems in their families or in their work or whatever. They really appreciated solitude in nature. It was a big thing with them. At 2 minutes and 54 seconds, we're into a rustic theme with rough-hewn bass notes. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds, the bass starts rushing as an outdoor horn call is sounded. The movement tends to be upward in this movement, the movement of the melodies, as it is in the strings in the fourth minute. I like the serene, thin string sound at 4 minutes and 45 seconds onwards. We go through more material of the same nature and reach that serene string sound again in the 8th minute. There's a big crescendo and upward reach in the 9th minute that brings us to an understated but warm theme at 9 minutes and 40 seconds. A sudden quietening from all the building up to climaxes occurs at around 11 minutes and 40 seconds, and from there, a new gradual crescendo builds, along with the harmonic tension, to a blazing brass line underpinned by rolling timpani and rushing strings in the 14th minute. We hear the chorale from the second movement here from 14 minutes and 40 seconds onwards as we rush towards the final sunny cadence, impressively taken by the orchestra, feeling exhilarating, and we end in exhilaration. So, this is a magnificent recording of a lively interpretation. The performance is of a piece, accentuating the form of each movement through its taut rhythms and attention to the shape of the thematic lines. It tries to balance the intellectual, that is the form, and emotional, which is the shaping of lines and dynamics, qualities of the work, and errs toward the intellectual side, though it gets a lot of emotion in. It doesn't reach the hysterical points that, say, Bernstein puts across. This is not something fans of the Adagietto are going to be happy to hear, by the way. But the Adagietto is well integrated into this interpretation of the score. The entire gigantic work is easily digestible here, or more easily than it usually is. It's a sort of a complement to Abbato's interpretation, where he balances the intellectual and emotional, but errs on the side of the emotional. This one kind of goes the other way. So anyway, my 3 albums on the classical end are all Austrian, and show, in a sense, these works all originated in Vienna, or close to it, and show the expansion of form over 2 centuries. So the Haydn works are basic length, the Schubert are longer, and the Mahler are even longer still. So I think in programming these 3 symphonies, I hope that this year is one of expansion of happiness for you, as is the program. And I hope that any darkness that you have will end in light by December 31st, as Mahler's Symphony does. So there's my theme for the new year, and you have 3 great new recordings to listen to.
Oh, nice context to put that into there. Yeah, you did pick a winner of a program this week. I enjoyed all these a lot, and I like this.
It was pure luck.
Yeah. I thought it's a great performance. It's very dramatic, but it never gets out of hand. Right. Everything stays in control. It doesn't get histrionic.
Right. Now, I know some people prefer the histrionic approach to Mahler.
No, I like this one a lot. I thought it was just right. And right from the opening trumpet, you're going to get a lot of great brass from this Czech ensemble here. That's what I was enjoying most of all, from the trumpets with this kind of Teutonic regal sound, and then the real powerful low brass all the way through. I just thought it sounded solid. And the whole recording has a kind of burnished sound quality to it that just really shines. And it's a long work. But again, the performance just engaged me right through to the end. I've got a few recordings of these Mahler symphonies, and sometimes I don't want to listen to this one just because it's I feel wiped out by the end of it. But I didn't feel that way here. It wasn't overly emotional, as you said. It was just the right touch, and you could focus more on the development of the different sections, and I found myself relating more of the elements that I heard in the composition than I usually do when I get just blown away by the dramatic interpretation of it. And so, really good end to this program of classical music.
Yeah, I want to say the Mahler Fifth Symphony too. It's a work, as really are all the Mahler symphonies, that really speaks to our rather anxious times. So you might want to give it a listen. It might give you a little bit of a lift out of any kind of anxiety that we're feeling now. I mean, you'll get to feel that anxiety in the piece at points, but he kind of works you out of it through his development of his themes and harmony.
All right. It's jazz time. Yeah. And this week we've got a lot of sax, all sax as a matter of fact, and a lot of contrast in these 3 recordings here. And the first one is really unique and enjoyable in terms of the material. And if anyone is a Generation Xer like we are, I think this one will be really interesting for you.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when we normally think of jazz and the jazz standard, the standards come from the American songbook, all those pop songs that came out of, Broadway musicals and then movies, going from maybe the late 20s up until 50s, the rock and roll time. And those songs that came from Broadway musicals and appeared in movies, those were the pop songs of the day. And they sort of became, part of the jazz standard repertoire. However, back in those days, those were the pop songs of the day, so everyone would know them. And now, they're still played in jazz, but they come from time period before. And now, if you grew up in a later time, the pop music that you grew up with, and sort of, at least with us, I'm sure, there's songs that are stuck in our brains forever. Even if we don't like them, we know all the lyrics and everything. And but those songs don't often get used, as a sort of basis for jazz improvisations. But that's what's going to happen here on this recording by the Charles Owens Quartet. It's called Golden Moments. It's on La Reserve Records, came out in November 11th. And Charles Owens, I should say, there's another Charles Owens sax player from a earlier generation, born in 1939. His real name was Brown, and he played with Buddy Rich and Mongo Santa Maria. But this is not that Charles Owens. This is Charles Owens now, who's a little bit younger than me. I think he's 50. And so...
No, that's old enough for this music that he's covering here.
So he attended the New School and worked as a musician in New York City from 1992 to 2004, but now he's based out of Richmond, Virginia. And I guess they've got a vibrant music scene there, and also in Charlottesville, Virginia. And he does travel back and forth to New York a few times a year to still perform there. And he's played with, Brad Meldau, Mark Turner, Kurt Rosenwinkel, Brian Blade, Peter Bernstein, Alexander Claffey, who we heard a few weeks ago on the podcast. And so you'll see his name with a lot of other big name jazz musicians as well. And so here he is with his group, also including Daniel Clark on piano. Owens plays tenor sax, by the way, I should mention, and Andrea Randazzo on bass, Brian Caputo on drums. Now, curiously, this album was recorded to analog tape. It's not a digital recording, but it's only available as a digital release right now. There's no physical media for this. So it's kind of,
I do hope it. I would get a CD of this, which would also be a digital recording, but even like a vinyl recording would be like as close as you can get to that.
Now, to give you the idea of what I'm talking about, there's some on Bandcamp's site. There's some of his quotes about this. So this is his quote. This is me going back and exploring repertoire that meant a lot to me my whole life. He says, people love these songs. And when I say people, I mean me too. Like I literally grew up with them and they have made an imprint on my psyche and an imprint on my heart. So when I play them, it feels so natural because it's been in my being for my whole life. And they've had this huge effect on me since I was literally a little kid, like close to even being a toddler. And so being about the same age.
Right. Me too. Yeah. I remember these songs from my youth as well.
Yeah. And he says, we would always do housework on Saturdays and we would have every radio in the house on the same station. So we'd be running around the house listening to the same thing, whatever room we were in.
And we had that too. We had like an intercom that kind of played the same thing throughout the house.
And so I really identified with this idea. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if all countries do this, but in America, we have the baby book, right? Parents, your mom keeps a book and it's got all of, your vaccinations and how much you grew and, whatever you did. And
you're writing your name every year,
Yeah. And you record the first things your child says. So my first sentence that's recorded in my baby book is, "Mommy, turn on the radio."
Oh, good for you.
My first sentence, that's how I became a music lover. So I was always listening to the radio. And so a lot of these songs that Charles Owens heard, I heard them too, and they were stuck in my head forever.
Right. Mine too. Yeah, I remember a lot of these as well.
And so we're going to get some unusual tunes in the jazz world here, starting right out with Supertramp.
Yeah.
1979, Breakfast in America. This was constantly on the radio. If you're Generation X, you grew up with this Supertramp, Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson.
Yeah, when it came out.
Yeah, this is a great little version of this. And it starts right out with Clark on the piano, pounding out that opening piano chords. You're going to, notice this right away if you grew up during the 70s. And Owens takes the vocal melody. It's a nice heavy rock groove on the tune with Randazzo's bass locking in with the piano that has a nice moving line below there. And what I like, it's going on sounding like an instrumental version of us, but then they make this nice switch to swing for the end of the verse on the lyrics. I'm hoping it's going to come true, but there's not a lot I can do. If you remember that lyric from the tune, it goes to swing there. Then they go back to the rock beat for the next verse, and they do the swing switch again. They rock it through the kind of instrumental part where the vocal is just ba-da-da-da, da-da-da. And I think the original had a clarinet solo in it, actually. But it's kind of a sassy sax falls from Owens there. Bring it down soft and rubato at the end with some nice chiming piano from Clark. Then Caputo gets a solid groove with sharp hits going for Owens' solo here. They keep the swing change-ups underneath, and Owens builds it nicely with bluesy lines, smearing phrases, and some really cool, intense double-time phrases outside of the chord licks and a high cry in there as well. And Clark gets a kind of soft and dreamy but rhythmic start to his piano solo, but turns up the intensity after the first switch to swing, getting into some really enthusiastic rhythmic playing for a great solo. They run through another round of the verse and then jam out for a while over a riff for Caputo to get busy on the drums, and then Owens gets some more wailing in there as well. There's some great funky bass lines by Randazzo underneath too, and they finish it with the soft ending from after the second verse, just like the original. So I thought I was hooked after this one. I said, okay, this is really cool material to do something with. Another song that was always on the radio for track 2, 1972, The Spinners. Could It Be I'm Falling in Love? This was written by songwriters Melvin and Mervyn Steels. I don't think they were part of the Spinners, though. And so Clark plays a 10-bar intro here with the famous phrase, this kind of ascending line that's the hook of the tune. Chords, it's tasty and snappy, answering phrases to himself there. And Caputo has tight hi-hat and cymbals going, and Randazzo deep ringing bass, and Owens takes the melody, and they have a nice breezy feel going to this tune. Listen to the snappy bass lines of Randazzo underneath. Owens pushes it up on the chorus, the "Could it be I'm falling in love?" The sax has this real rising with answering phrases from Clark there too. And then they take it down easy into the second verse. And I like how they switch up the chorus the next time with Clark taking the main melody of the "Could It Be" part. Because if you remember that, it's locked in my head. He's a "with your baby." This is like answering line. So Owens takes that kind of answer line on the sax and give me a little smile. Clark has a solo next, super snappy, rhythmic, but flowing lines, and then hammering chords. And Owen starts it really smooth for his solo, but gets down in the lower register. He makes his line snap to the groove, gets more jazzy, and then some kind of R&B influenced sax playing as he goes on. They give it another verse with Owens blowing it out more on the final chorus. Then the "with you" lines get wispier as Clark adds great flowing triplets underneath on the piano. He works the sax up into high cries and then gets to blow on more intensely for some final soloing, echoing the "with you" phrase into a softer, lower ending. So, that one brought back memories too.
There's something about this tune I want to say. I like the way the contrast between the whole idea of falling in love. We always say fall in love like it's love is a hole and I fell in it. And yet on that line, "Could it be I'm falling?" He's rising.
Yeah.
And I've always loved that.
Yeah.
I've always loved that contrast. I mean, I caught that when I was really younger, and I think it kind of helped me to be able to, hold contrast in my brain, whereas everybody else kind of tends to freak out. I think our generation is better at that because of songs like this that we had just heard all the time.
Yeah. Track 3, another name that was all over the radio in the 70s, Burt Bacharach, "Living Together" album from 1973. This is Something Big. Now, the original starts with something like a nylon string guitar on a riff, but Owens takes it on the tenor sax, making it bigger and bolder. Clark joins in with high ringing piano lines, bass and drums come in, giving it a real push. The original intro is short, but they groove out on it here, giving it kind of a modal jazz feel until Owens bursts out with big sunny melody on it. Randazzo has a great Bacharach bass pulse, ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. If you know those Dionne Warwick kind of arrangements, he picks up on that. And the bass and piano take the rhythmic trombone counterline from the original for a cool surprise in the arrangement. So I like that they pick up on these little features of the tunes and they incorporate that into their arrangement, obviously on different instruments here. But those details are picked up a lot on all these tunes. There's a second verse with some tasty piano fills from Clark. Then Owens is up for a solo, and he has really zippy double-time lines, some interesting harmonic twists through the chords here. They bring back the riff, this time with piano and bass vamping out for Caputo to get some busy drumming time, gradually building in intensity with Owens adding lines on top into a final verse with some lovely final piano runs from Clark to send it off. So this is a really great arrangement, and it makes a super uplifting mood. Burt Bacharach had all those kind of fancy chords in his tunes in the 70s, and sometimes his arrangements were a little cheesy, but the harmonies were always really good.
The harmonies are good, and they can be, even if the arrangements are cheesy, they can be made really great. I mean, the content is really fantastic.
Track 4, Beatles. Yes, Here, There, and Everywhere.
It's really almost a perfect song in a way. It's really beautiful.
This is from the 1966 Revolver album, but it was still constantly on the radio into the 70s. Clark here gets a rubato solo piano intro working around the harmonies with a nice flow. Owens comes in on the melody, still rubato, somewhat like the original version of the tune, but with extra time for more flowing piano waves from Clark. They take the melody at a very relaxed tempo. Randazzo has a really good snap in his bass here too. It picks up some lift on the bridge modulation. I Want Her Everywhere. That really just lifts in this tune. And I like how Randazzo picks up the guitar riff in the bass. There's, a movement in the original. The line goes up and he does it on the bass. They work it through some nice modulations with a riff into Owens' solo that has an unhurried quality and picks out snippets of the melody line nicely. Clark has a solo with rolling lines that get kind of a gospel feel going to it. And Owens joins back in on the bridge, and he carries on with the melody. They go through the modulation riff idea again, working into some more soloing as the intensity of the groove picks up to a nice climax. Then they bring it down softly, ending with the rubato opening phrase. It's a nice arrangement with a real nice arc to the tune. Now, I'm not sure about track 5. This is a Cole Porter tune, Get Out of Town. Goes back to 1938. Musical Leave It to Me. And there's been a lot of versions by jazz singers, Ella Fitzgerald, Anita O'Day. So I'm not sure what arrangement
how this fits into the album.
Yeah, how it fits in. Anyway, Clark gives this one a unique intro with an 8-bar piano start that is snappily rhythmic and has some close dissonances in it. Bass and drums join in for another round, bringing the swing with a big bass walking from Randazzo. Owens comes in with the melody with a full-throated, straight-ahead blowing style, nice accent hits by Caputo on his phrases, and Owens continues on into a solo. The tune has nice harmonic twists from the main minor melody, and Owens swings hard and blows gutsy phrases and rips through a lot of double-time lines. Clark really swings in his piano solo here with great percussive left-hand chords, ending with some nice synced two-hand figures and some rhythmic play. And Randazzo gets a bass solo next, working out some cool interval ideas into bouncy melodic lines. And Owens returns to trade eighths with Caputo, Clark, and Randazzo, and they finish it up with another run through the melody. There's a lot of nice forward energy here, and a great recording sound comes through. It's analog tape, but it sounds, it has that natural kind of organic sound to it. Track 6, Frank Sinatra's famous It Was a Very Good Year, which was composed by Irvin Drake in 1961. Sinatra recorded it in 66. Owen starts this one with a cool solo original riff idea that traces the harmonic movement. The phrases are clipped in a cool way that kind of disguises the meter. Maybe it was inspired by the original, at the beginning of the original tune. I think it's an oboe, if my mind remembers right, or it could be English horn, but I'm pretty sure it's oboe. And the others join in to work it some more into the melody. They give this a great groove with light drum work from Caputo and a Spanish-sounding ostinato bass riff from Randazzo that makes a mysterious atmosphere. Owens gets a good feeling of gravitas on the phrases that evokes Sinatra's feel and phrasing, and I like how he continues on taking the instrumental transition lines to the next verse. He gets some subtle modal embellishments this time and works it into a solo. The groove is great in the bass and the drums, and Owens works up from seductive short rhythmic and later phrases. Clark starts his solo playfully here, teasing lines, working into some dissonant moving ideas, and then great chiming two-handed chords. And he goes for some Spanish kind of modal tinge that's implied by those harmonies too. Owens comes back for another verse, takes the instrumental transition into another slowed verse that creates a dreamy kind of introspective feel, and they take it out with the original riff idea for an outro. It's a very cool arrangement, pulling out and expanding on a lot of the harmonic suggestions that are in the tune and creating this great groove to set it to.
Yeah, and in fact, I really have never liked this song until now, really, until I heard this particular, the Sinatra version, because I heard it when I was like, really, my dad liked Frank Sinatra, so you would hear this on when he would be playing the radio, and Sinatra, there was a 3-hour Frank Sinatra program, and I always thought this was really just too quiet. It was very adult at the time when I was a kid, so I didn't, and I don't know, I guess if I heard the Sinatra version again, I'd probably like it more now, but
now that you're older.
This really, now that I'm older.
In your autumn years.
I'm in my autumn years. At least it's not winter yet.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah. All right, track 7. What other big name from the 70s? James Taylor. 1976, recording In the Pocket, and this is the title track, Golden Moments. So, interestingly enough, Owens sits out on this one. So it's just the trio here. And Clark gives it a great ringing rubato piano intro. Bass and drums join in and it gets into tempo. Clark stays with the melody and captures the dreamy feel of the original very well. There's some nice little moving lines in the bass underneath, and then Randazzo gets the melody on the bass, and he really makes it sing like James Taylor. Yeah, really nice bass playing here. But he also includes some snappy rhythmic improvisations. And Clark gets a solo with clear ringing articulation, really builds and pressurizes the phrases to climaxes. Caputo helps it swell with heavier beats, but mostly kind of simple textures and things around the piano. And Randazzo has a very settled and loping bass groove for Clark to work over in the final stretch as he rings out the notes. Very atmospheric kind of performance of this tune. Then another huge band of the 70s that was always on the radio, Chicago. And they really changed their style with this album, Chicago 10 from 1976.
This band named all their albums like 1, 2, 3. What is this nonsense? Yeah, it's hard to know what's on each one, you know?
But this was sort of marked the ballad career of Peter Cetera, the singer and bass player, and If You Leave Me Now. And so here Clark gives us the famous opening on piano, and Owens comes in on the melody. Bass and drums give it a nice push on his syncopated accents. Clark gets rolling waves under the start of the chorus, and Caputo has subtle mixing it up underneath. Owens takes the original instrumental break line in the lower register, pushing into an animated solo that reaches and subsides back into another verse that transitions to a solo for Clark. It's quite playful with some interval ideas and has fun hesitated phrases before getting busier while Owens adds backing lines to the end. And then we're going to end up with another version of Bacharach's Something Big. This is extended, so the earlier track is 6 minutes, and this one's 9 minutes. It's got the addition of a really energetic bass solo from Randazzo and also a piano solo from Clark that gets things going as well. Track 3 only had Owens soloing, so this is a longer version. It's worth hearing for these other solos. And I really enjoyed this recording. It brought back a lot of memories of my youth. I liked how they paid attention to the little details from the originals and brought them out in the quartet format, maybe in a different instrument line, but it showed remembering those little pieces of the tune that stick in your ear. Each tune goes someplace and creates new atmospheres, like It Was a Very Good Year, as we mentioned, and energetic solos all around, especially from Owens and Clark.
Yeah, one of the things that gets thrown into relief when you hear these familiar songs played without words like this is how musical they really are. Harmonies and melodies are richer than you remembered them, because especially when you were that young, you just kind of thought of the melody line, basically, you know, which is often the harmony was often hidden by the voice and the words. I mean, when you were a kid, you were just looking for some kind of meaning, and you'd listen to the words.
Yeah.
These arrangements were really enjoyable. I think these golden moments of my youth were captured here as well. As he called the album Golden Moments. They were golden moments for me, too. Yeah. The arrangements are all comfortable in that they made me feel good, is what I mean by that. And I enjoyed the pianist playing on this album. He goes from idea to idea seamlessly, as though the ideas are all cut from the same cloth. Yet when you're hearing them, they don't seem to be. He finds connections which made him interesting to me. I kind of like to do this like in writing, where you kind of have these two ideas that don't seem able to be linked up at all, and I like to find a connection between them. And this pianist does this. I found this album to be mostly like warm and fuzzy and very enjoyable. And I grew up in this era as well. And I just want to say to Charles Owens, thanks for the trip. This is the album, by the way, I would get on a CD, Charles. So if you want to release it that way, I'd be very happy.
Yeah, I'd like to have this one too. It's unique. Yeah, very enjoyable. All right. Next, I'm sure of it, we've done a lot of international jazz recordings, but we haven't been to Bulgaria yet.
Oh, but we have now.
Now we have. And this was an interesting challenge, something different. And, well, you know, when we talked with Rudresh Mahantapa in the interview, I kind of asked him if he thought that, players would be bringing more influences from their own cultures and sort of folk musics more into jazz. And he seemed to, having done that himself with, Indian music, he seemed to kind of not think there was going to be anything new brought into jazz anymore. But I think this is a very interesting melding of some folk elements from Bulgarian music. And we're speaking of the saxophonist Vladimir Karparov, and he's on the Unit label with his new release Iglika. And so Karparov was born in 1977. He grew up in Bulgaria's capital, Sofia, and discovered music at an early age. I believe his older brother is a pianist and composer as well. He started playing saxophone when he was 12 years old, and he played as a street musician, developing improvisation skills, and then he studied at the National Academy of Music in Sofia, jazz and popular music. And then he's always had this strong interest in Bulgarian folk music. As he became more interested in jazz music, he's sort of put these two elements together. He's been in Germany since 2002, so for 20 years now, and studied music there as well. His debut album was released in 2007, and then he had another project in 2009 with a saxophone quartet. They had an album in 2014, also on Unit Records. And so I thought, well, this sounds kind of interesting. Here we haven't done anything from Bulgaria yet. So this proved to be a challenging but also rewarding kind of listen here. So Karparov's on sax here, Daniel Stawinski on piano, Igor Spalati on bass, and Dimitris Christidis on drums. There's also a Radio Bulgaria interview that had some insight for some of the tunes, so I translated that and tried to get a little more background here. So we're going to start out with a tune called Merek, and I guess this means desire or yearning. Karparov starts it out with a fast repeating rhythmic riff on tenor that navigates a harmonic pattern implying different kind of modes. Christidis joins in with drumming and the piano and bass with the addition of a new counterline on soprano sax on another track by Karparov. That surprised me right away. It's pretty thrilling and soon changes up with some new patterns and tricky syncopated accents. There's a new section with bass and piano, left-hand lines, and a new smoother sax line that segues into a new riff melody section on both horns. The rhythm seems to have a fast 8-beat feel to it, but the accented phrases make it hard to keep your finger on the pulse of the meter. Stawinski is up for a piano solo next, and he plays hard percussive figures and lines, dancing around the switching modal harmonies. Karparov brings back the smoother sax lines to end the section, and the piano takes the sax riff figure for a kind of hypnotic backing to a start of a tenor solo from Karparov. He starts it out with smooth lines that get faster and more meandering, working into lines that become more Bulgarian folk music influenced with modal scales and these little bouncy ornaments. And that's kind of the hallmark of his style, these ornaments, which he's...
It sounds very folk-like, too. These kind of, like for Eastern European or Bulgarian in this case, I guess.
And the soprano sax comes back in for a very folk-influenced and busy line together with the tenor. Nice work from Christidis accenting things on the drums underneath. It comes to a sudden stop with some trailing tenor lines, and then there's a reset to the opening riff again, and they build it up with soprano added and tricky accents once more. This time they vamp out on the final rising dual sax line to the end, making an uplifting mood and giving Christidis some time to mix things up intensely around the drum kit. This is rhythmically very tricky, lots of interesting modes and ornaments, and an engaging start to this recording. The next track, Camelino Horo, and this is dedicated to his wife, Camelia. The trio starts this one out for 8 measures as a brisk but loose 6/8 meter with decorative cymbal work from Christidis. Ringing and bending bass under the piano chords. Karparov comes in with the melody on tenor sax. It slightly reminds me of I'll Remember April at the start. I don't know why. He uses a lot of ornaments in the lines, creating a unique feel. Seems to be a 24-bar melody here. And then he adds another sax line together, and they work the melody with the piano, sometimes splitting into harmonies. It's busy and fun. Stawinski comes out of that with a piano solo, showing a lot of variety and articulation from smooth to more percussive with some impressively speedy lines and ringing chimes. Karparov's next, starting with the smooth, fast lines on tenor, works in some of his ornament ideas. He really gets some burning double-time phrases going. And then the bass and piano drop out, and he gets really ornamental over the quickening drumming of Christidis. He works it straight into a composed line with another sax track joining in on some really fast and tricky figures. Christidis beats it into a return of the melody with 2 sax parts this time. The ending is fun with solo sax and then solo piano phrases on the way to the end in the speedy lines together. Track 3, the title track, Iglika, which is named after his 6-year-old daughter. This one's another 6/8 tune, this time a bit slower. Karparov comes straight in with the melody from a pickup note. The melody has a longing quality to it, and it shows off his warm tenor tone nicely. Spilatti gets a run through the melody on bass with a ringing tone. Stawinski has a piano solo. Next, nice sense of touch, ringing high register tones, and some interesting rhythmic runs. Karparov follows with a tenor solo, balancing smooth fast lines with more pleading, higher register phrases. The bass solo working some high notes with hard articulation and a cool rising gliss. Oh, then Karparov returns with the melody on soprano sax into some fluid improvisations to the end. A real nice switch up, lifting the mood of the tune at the end.
So I guess you could say that the album is named after his daughter, too.
Yes, yeah.
Which is rather nice. And she'll grow up and she'll have, he's got this album named after me. That's really nice.
I have no idea how to pronounce this track 4. Zappelig Fuese?
Yeah, my understanding of Eastern European languages is that the accent is always on the first syllable. So
okay. Anyway, I'm not going to try it again.
You can err on that side. You have a better chance of being right. Anyway,
this is a real fun tune. The melody has cool little dissonant descending figures in the sax and piano that repeat and come back between other phrases. It works into a really folk-inspired dancing melody filled with tricky rhythmic changes and ornaments. There's so much going on that I didn't even try to figure out the structure as I tried to hang on to what's going on. Karparov comes out of that with a solo bouncy riff idea, and they get really grooving with it. Piano and drums are back, and Stawinski gets an animated piano solo over the busy drum beats. Karparov returns for a busy line doubled by piano, and then Stawinski keeps the rhythmic riff idea going for Karparov to get some fun reed-stopping sounds and harmonics out of the sax into a solo of snappy rhythmic phrases. He really peppers on the ornaments here and then gets some burning high register lines. Exciting stuff. Christidis gets a drum solo with phrases interjected by the others to push him on into another run through the topsy-turvy melody. You might think it's ended on a couple of phrases, but it's not done until Karparov gets a final rising line and a yelp. It's a crazy fun tune with a burning tenor sax solo.
I call this actually a fascinating composition, too. So I guess I picked up on that, too. And you said you didn't know how to describe it. What I wrote is, this has a Bulgarian sound to it in the odd rhythm and melody. Okay, I guess it's as close as we can get. Yeah. But this is one to sample, I would say. If you want to get an idea of what this album's like.
The album start with this tune. And the solo is really intense. All right, another tongue twister here. Tegedu dap dedu. I guess you got a G and a D together with no vowel between. So,
what's with that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like to buy a vowel, please.
I would like to buy a vowel, please, and put it in there. I don't know.
Karparov begins this one on solo soprano sax with a melody line. It's got these real pleasing interval jumps. The trio joins in, making a dreamy kind of atmosphere. It has a cool ringing bass line under Stawinski's soft piano, and if you pay attention, you'll notice that it's a 7/4 meter here. Karparov plays lyrically, and the melody has answering bass and left-hand piano lines. The next section of it seems to change meter into 8-beat phrases, and maybe something else that gets more animated with the piano underneath. It comes down gently for a bass solo, and the notes really ring out with some cool sliding interval ideas and high register work. There's a nice harmonic shift into a soprano solo from Karparov. He keeps it lyrical and fluid, even when his lines get fast, and ends with some trills before coming back into the melody, adding a voice to the line later with ringing piano lines from Stawinski as they repeat the phrase building to the end. Track 6 is called Sylvester Kuchek, and this comes from inspired and written after he had to play for a New Year's Eve party for people he didn't know, and he was invited by a DJ who he didn't know either, and apparently it was kind of a mismatch of a gig that he went away like dejected from, but he got this tune inspired out of it, which is another interesting rhythmic tune. 2 tenor sax lines on the melody. The first strain has 3 syncopated measures and then a triplet and ornamented line in the 4th measure. It's fun and dance-like. The next sections have a lot of rhythmic surprises with tricky rhythms, and there's like a loping bass line that comes out of the sax business to start a solo just over the drums. He makes it low and bluesy with some cool glisses and rhythmic figures. There's another double sax line into a tenor solo from Karparov, bursting with busy figures. A nice mixing up of the beats by Christidis underneath. It's a minor bluesy Bulgarian hybrid, and he gives it a rhythmic ending into a cry back into another round of the melody. So another interesting tune. Track 7 is called The Drama of Greek Drummer. I don't know what the story for this one is, but must be something interesting. Karparov starts it out with a rhythmic repeating riff on the soprano sax. Christodis joins under with clicky ideas and builds it into a roll into the entrance of rhythmic piano lines and bass. It's a really busy melody, alternating measures of 7 and 8 beats. It gets quieter for some bass soloing under the sax lines, and it builds into a piano solo from Stowinski, who really hammers it out with some almost Cuban-esque type rhythmic playing. Karparov swoops back in with a soprano sax solo full of tricky ornaments and rhythmic figures, but some cool bluesy licks too. And he brings it back and keeps the riff going softly over Christodis' drum solo, and bass and piano work it up more into some sax melody lines from Karparov, and then we get surprised with some bouncy harmonized vocals on the melody line to a sudden ending. Track 8 is called Refugee. It's a ballad feel with a 4-measure intro, ringing bass notes and piano in a 7/4 meter. Karparov comes in with the soprano sax melody. This one is really unique sounding in the upper register. It's pretty and has an exotic character to it. The phrasing is unique, and the meter changes up on the way to a hold and then a pause. It restarts with a 4-beat feel, for a while anyway, before changing again. Stowinski gets a pretty and restrained piano solo before Karparov returns for a soprano sax solo, tying back to the melody for a bit and some more delicate improvisations and a pretty ending. Track 9, the last track, Berlinsko Horo, or Berlin Horo Dance, kind of dedicated to where he's lived for 20 years. And Karparov comes right in with a zigzaggy, angular line over accented piano and bass backing. The next melody section has shorter phrases with space into the final section of bouncy, ornamented sax phrases. Stowinski's up for a piano solo, starting with a light touch but getting more rhythmically insistent and dynamic. Karparov comes back with the opening melody line into an improvised solo. He gets really playful here with ornaments and accented interval ideas. Then he adds a composed line for 2 saxes before working into more improvisations and another run through the melody sections with a rather soft ending. And that's it. It's very complex music, but it's quite fun and engaging, and it really is a melding of Bulgarian musical elements and jazz, and it works well in an interesting and fresh kind of way. The compositions keep you guessing with the structures, meters, and tricky rhythms, and Karparov has a really impressive technique on the saxophone and lots of cool ideas in his solos. I enjoyed Stowinski's piano playing, a lot of versatility shown. Spalati's bass is steady with good ringing out solos, and Christodis mixes it up with nice fills over all of these tricky rhythms. I had a lot of fun listening to this recording.
Yeah, me too. I like music that keeps me guessing. It's good for my brain. Okay. Another thing about this album is it has great sound quality. It's got rich sounding and it's warm in the low end. The Bulgarian rhythms and melodies actually add to the appeal, and they're integrated so well into the jazz structure. To me, this sounded more like a jazz album than an album of Bulgarian, say, music. So it does kind of qualify more as jazz. Yeah, I liked that piece, Zapelige Fuese, with its the track 4 that we said would be a great sampling piece with its quirky rhythms and odd approaches to solos. It stood out for me and was adventurous and still nevertheless easily listenable. I like the warm piano playing that you mentioned too, which drew contrast with the more active Bulgarian material. This was a really interesting record, I thought. It was quite a good call over there.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty pleased. I like that when we go to a new country and we find some original influence from the player's musical background. And I think this was a good choice. And I'm going to look for more of his recordings. And maybe we'll find some more Bulgarian jazz.
Maybe we'll even hear him live one day.
Yeah, be great.
Yeah. All right. Come to Japan.
Yeah. All right, we're going to end up with the place we always go to, Italy.
Italy. We love Italy, don't we? I love Italy anyway.
This is the latest release from Alfredo Ponissi with his Regeneration Quartet on DDE Records. This came out December 18th. Now, Ponissi is born in Turin in 1955. He's got a 30-year career. He's a composer. He plays all the saxophones, flute, clarinet, piano, and his bio says, as well as being an excellent singer. Well, you'll hear some of his singing on this recording as well. He writes poetry and screenplays for theater and cinema as well. And we've heard him before on the podcast, also on DDE Records, episode 74, Italian Explosion. He was featured on the Young and up-and-coming trumpet players, Cesare Mecca, who we really liked for his
one of our albums of the year. Yeah,
of the real old-style Blue Note feel. But however, Ponissi just seems to be like in constant motion. This is his 4th recording that came out this year, and one of those was a double album as well. I had them all on my list. I didn't get to. I said, well, we'll have to get to at least one of his recordings this year. Here's Ponissi on various saxes, tenor, alto, soprano, flute, and all of his original compositions on this recording as well. We've got, now you can help me with my pronunciations if I screw anything up.
Oh, I can do this. I know Italian.
We've got Gianluca Palazzo on guitar.
Gianluca Palazzo, very good.
Gian Maria Ferrario on bass.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Francesco Brancato on drums.
This should be Francesco. Yeah.
Can't say it like you do, but do my best.
I'm just remembering my days in Florence this morning.
Yeah. And so all original compositions. I'm going to start with Boogaloo. Is it Cicio's? Is that how you say it?
Cicio's
Boogaloo. Yeah.
Ciccio is, by the way, a diminutive of Francesco, the name Francesco. But it could also mean he's chubby, but it doesn't have to.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because if anybody saw the movie Luca, the Pixar movie from 2 years ago, like one of the bad kids is Ciccio, and he's a little chubby. It doesn't have to, but in the South, boys named Francesco are often like called Ciccio as a nickname, but it doesn't mean they're fat. It just means their name is Francesco. Anyway, there you go. It's complicated.
Anyway, this one's got a slow and funky groove on bass and drums from Ferrario and Brancato for 4 bars to start it. Then Palazzo rings out some chords synced with Ferrario's bass for another 4 bars before Ponissi comes in with the sassy repeated riff-based melody with a nice husky tenor tone. It's a 16-bar minor bluesy melody. They go around it twice before Ponissi continues on into a solo. Ponissi keeps it relaxed and soulful through his choruses. The chunky guitar chords by Palazzo underneath almost sound like a Rhodes piano in tone. This guitar player's tone continually impressed me through this recording. But here, just the attack on them is like keyboard-like. Palazzo's up next for his own guitar solo over a funky rhythmic bass of Ferrario. It's really fluid and inventive lines, and his tone is rounded with a nice deep reverb. And then Ponissi joins back in for a couple more rounds of the melody to finish it up. Track 2, Blues for Rashawn Roland Kirk, the amazing reed man who could play all sorts of instruments at once.
And with his mouth.
With his mouth, yeah. And I think he had a nose flute too. Anyway, this is, as advertised, a slow looping 12-bar blues. And Ponissi blows it on the flute with simultaneous vocalizations underneath, just like Roland Kirk was famous for doing. Right. I like the lazy hesitation on the last bar of the melody. And then we get a treat with some bluesy vocals from Ponissi, all about Kirk's playing and, jazzy life for several choruses with some stop time thrown in for fun. And then Ponissi takes a couple of choruses on a flute solo, more fun vocalizations in there, and then he comes back for another couple more vocal choruses. Good fun and a nice tribute to Kirk's playing. Track 3, Top Hat. This one's got a soulful kind of R&B feel to the tune. Nice slow groove from Brancato on drums. It's an AABA melody. Ponissi blows some sassy alto sax on the bluesy melody. Fun vibrato and interval embellishments at the end of the melody there too. Palazzo's up first for a solo of climbing and tumbling phrases. I really like his relaxed phrasing. The sax joins back in on the B section for some soulful soloing into the last A section of the melody. It's got an extended coda ending, and I'm not sure, but it sounds to me like he picks up another sax a la Roland Kirk style to double up the parts for a surprise ending. It doesn't sound like an overdubbed line, and it's got a kind of weird tone to it. Maybe he was channeling Kirk's spirit here, but that's just my guess.
Is that by the Top Hat? I think there was a movie with Fred Astaire in it called Top Hat. Does this have anything to do with that? Is this an old tune or is it new?
I don't think so. I think it's his own composition. Yeah.
Because people don't wear top hats anymore.
No.
I'm kind of curious about that.
One of the complaints I have about DDE records is they give absolutely no information about the recording anywhere online. They put the musician's name. Luckily, they were on the cover photo, but right. I didn't know who plays what, so I had to investigate all of that kind of stuff, and I had to use my secret Chinese site to make sure they were all his original compositions. And so
the secret Chinese site actually lists these things. How do Where do they get that information
It rarely
from?
lets me down. I don't know. It must be
probably from TikTok, and it's going to the government. And then,
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, so there are some benefits to that.
Yeah,
anyway.
some benefits for me. But come on, DDE Records, get some recording notes up on your site. Anyway, track 4, Funky Mama.
Oh, boy.
And as labeled, it's a funky Lee Morgan-esque kind of tune with 2 sax parts on the melody riff. In the 11th and 12th bars, Ponissi calls out, "Funky Mama, Funky Mama."
He does.
Yes. They go around that twice, and then one more time with a little different riff into a break and a stop time for a guitar solo from Palazzo. He's got deep reverb and some fun harmonic outside licks here. Ponissi is next for a flute solo. He follows that with a tenor solo and then a soprano solo. Milking
Very impressive,
a long, fast lick on the soprano to build up tension, back into a couple rounds of the melody with added vocalizations and some final repeated funky mamas.
I wonder if he does that when they perform live. Is he actually switching from horn to horn like really this quickly? I'd be amazed to see that. Really.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. He probably does, yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Track 5.
You have to have them really handy.
Yeah. La Oca, which I think means the goose.
It does.
Ferrario gets out the bass bow for some nice interplay with Ponissi's flute, a pretty flowing ballad opening. Palazzo has soft ringing chords, and Brancato has some wind chime things going in the background. There's a long pause, and then Brancato gets it restarted with a busy drum beat. Ferrario adds a pulsing bass, and Ponissi comes back with the melody, and now we're sambaing away. Nice interplay between the flute lines and Palazzo's added guitar lines along with his chords. Ponissi blows a fine uplifting flute solo, keeping his lines very melodic. And the Palazzo's up next on guitar with a flowing but rhythmically snappy solo. They go around the melody once more with some final repeated alternating chords that Brancato uses to stir up a big finish on the drums underneath. Track 6 called How Far, How Far. And this one starts with some kind of atmospheric ocean sounds. Then Brancato gets a clicky gospel-y beat going, and Ponissi is on soprano sax here for the melody, which has short 2-note interval phrases over some churchy organ. I know he plays keyboards too. Maybe he's playing the organ. No album notes, I don't know. But the organ really creates the atmosphere on this tune. They go around that again, this time trading the short phrases between guitar and sax before they join together on the phrases. There's an 8-bar bridge section before a repeat of the final A melody phrase. Palazzo has a delicate guitar solo with nice rising lines, and then Ponissi gets a soaring melodic soprano solo back into another run through the melody to a slowed down ending and some final ocean sounds. And the organ really gives this piece its gospel atmosphere. All right, you read the title on this one.
Yeah, Judita Walzer. No, Judita is a woman's name, Judith, and it's the Judith Waltz.
Judith Waltz, and it is a gentle waltz with an 8-bar intro, ringing bass notes over guitar chords. Ponissi comes in with the melody on a sweet-toned Paul Desmond-like alto sax. Very nice interplay with the guitar here, too. And Ponissi blows a very breezy solo with some nice control in the higher register. Brancato adding tasty fills to build him up at the end. Palazzo has a agile guitar solo here with some tasty hesitation on phrases between other rapid flowing lines to take another run through the melody, with a little extended vamping for some final sweet sax phrases. Very nice sax tone. Track 8, Nux Fluke. Back to a bigger tenor sax sound on this minor melody with a Latin beat. There's a 16-bar melody section that we hear twice, then an 8-bar bridge that changes up to swing, and a final 8-bar Latin section that has a break for Ponissi to start blowing a solo. They keep the rhythm swinging throughout the solo section. Ponissi keeps his phrasing legato and swings out melodically. Palazzo gets a guitar solo bursting with tricky lines that get rhythmically adventurous, also quoting from If I Should Lose You just before the ending. And Ponissi returns for another run through the melody, and they bring back the Latin beat, including the sing section, and run it straight to the end. Track 9, Il Maestro Sorride. The Master Smiles. Yeah. Sorride. The Master Smiles, yeah. A gentle ballad that shows off Ponissi's warm tenor sound. It's an AABA 32-bar form and has a jazz standard type of familiarity to it with an uplifting B section. Palazzo adds a lot of tasty ringing guitar ideas underneath, and Ferrario finally gets his bass solo here, and he plays a melodic one with gentle attacks on his notes. Palazzo follows with a gently unfolding solo, and then Ponissi gets a tenor solo, some really great soft phrasing and articulation articulation. I like his snappy little triplet figures in those lines. He returns to the melody for the final A section with some extended holds at the end to make a lush finish. We're going to end up with Calypso King. A tenor sax melody over bowed bass, ringing guitar chords, and percussion textures from Brancato. Palazzo gets some play on the melody for a bit before Ponissi takes it back for the final phrase, and then there's a pause, and now we're at 2 minutes and 20 seconds in, and Brancato sets it up with the beat for the calypso to begin.
It's kind of interesting that they delayed it that long, yeah.
Ponissi takes the easy bouncing theme into a breezy solo with fun, rhythmic, and happy licks. Palazzo solos next with freer phrasing over snappy bass lines underneath that sound really good from Ferrario. And then Ponissi comes back for another run through the melody, and they give the rubato theme with the bowed bass a final reprise to end it. So there you have it. It's an enjoyable recording. There's a good variety of grooves and tunes, from funky to fun and gentle ballad material, all composed by Ponissi, who shows a lot of versatility: soprano, alto, tenor, flute. And I like how he has a different personality on each horn with a wide range of expression that he suits to the material like a real sax master. Brancato and Ferrario do a great job on the rhythms, and I was continually impressed by the tone and inventiveness in soloing by Palazzo's playing on guitar on this recording.
Yeah, I thought this was a really fun album. It kind of made me think of Ramsey Lewis in the funkier sections, and Lou Donaldson too, and it's more pop kind of.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Things like Lou Donaldson in his later years when he did like Alligator Boogaloo and things like that. Yeah, it's light. It's got a lot of those 50s and 60s jazz kind of vibes to it. Mm-hmm. I was personally happy that he's into this era and is keeping it alive. You know, it was a fun thing. I mean, jazz can be light too, and I really enjoyed that.
There it is, 3 very different sax albums to get the year started. And I think next week is kind of following that very different idea. We're going to have kind of a potpourri of things going on, right?
I'm going to keep us in Italy, though, because I think it's always important to be in Italy, at least as often as possible. Yeah, in a sense. But we'll have other things, too. We have we're all over the place next week. Yeah. In fact, we're still not, needless to say, there aren't any 2023 recordings out yet. And I still have some 2022 things that I really need to talk about over the next few weeks. So we'll be hearing a lot of those, along with maybe anything new that comes out soon. We'll have to see.
We'll see. Writing down and saving jazz releases right up until December 30th. I was surprised people are still releasing things right to the end of the year, but there were quite a few.
I could easily go until June doing it was a good year, 2022. I was just talking about this with someone last night at a New Year's Eve party I was at, how the last 2 years in jazz have really been really enjoyable, if not, kind of pushing the form forward, which I don't really believe is a real thing. I mean, you just play what you you feel is great, and that's what you put out. But,
So I'm going to, I won't tell you where, but this week we did Bulgaria. We're going to have a couple other firsts next week as well. Good. So we're going international to get things started.
And for me, too, we'll be going to Estonia to a recording that was released really in summer last year, but I feel like I have to get to it because it's so good. we had to hear it. I never got to it simply because we were doing all those like themed episodes. I had it on my list. Right. I was like, when am I going to do this? And then the months passed. Yeah. But I'm going to cheat and put it in next week. So,
all right. So a lot to look forward to. If you want to know what's on that listening list after you hear this episode, you can go over to Deezer or the link from Facebook, and you can find all those recordings if you want to listen to them early. They'll be up shortly after this episode gets published. So,
all right, there you go.
That's it.
There it is. First podcast of the new year. There will be many more to come.
Yes. And thanks as always to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo.
And Happy New Year to them too, by the way.
Happy New Year, Rich.
To Fast Signs and his whole staff, really.
Make us look good as well as sound good.
2 things that are not easy to do.
We'll have a big year of music coming up, so looking forward to that. So check out those other podcasts. The promos are coming up at the end of this recording, and we'll see you for episode 97 next week.
Gerald Albright, Rhea Schneider, Charlie Hunter, Duke Robillard, Sean Jones, Walter Beasley, Steve Swallow. Something Came from Baltimore is a jazz, blues, and R&B podcast and radio show, and it's not really about Baltimore. Subscribe to the podcast and listen to your favorite artist or future favorite artist. That's Something Came from Baltimore. And be a part of that Be More music scene. Joe Lovano, Jeff Compton, Paula Cole, Danuzo Makatani, Ann Passio, Ches Smith, Thumbscrew, mostly.
Hi, jazz fans. This is the founder and host of Neon Jazz, Joe Domino. It's both a weekly radio show and interviews with musicians from all over the world, like the Netherlands, New York City, and back to Kansas City, the home of Neon Jazz, covering the rich history and modern world of jazz in a fresh way, featuring interviews with the likes of Arturo Sandoval, Sonny Rollins, Maria Schneider, and countless others. Find our weekly show on Mixcloud. Subscribe to the interviews via iTunes and YouTube. We are Neon Jazz.
Same difference. Two jazz fans, one jazz standard. A review of a single jazz standard through music, history, and stories. And this is AJ.
And this is Johnny.
If you are a jazz fan and you like jazz standards, bebop, show tunes, ballads, you name it.
Yeah, we've got them here. We drop a new show on you every other week, and we take a standard and we listen to a few different versions of it.
Same difference.
Come join the fun.
Looking forward to seeing you.